Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where silk rustles through cold stone corridors, secrets echo off chapel walls, and one wrong look, or kiss, can get your head lopped off. It's 1542 and you're Catherine Howard. Beautiful, young, and about to be Queen of England. Sounds magical, right? Except for the part where you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your city and what time it is where you are. I want to know who's joining me on this midnight march into Tudor doom. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are born sometime around 1523 or 1524, though no one can agree exactly when. Record keeping for noble girls was often as flimsy as the threadbare tapestries hanging in old manor halls. Your father is Lord Edmund Howard, a younger son of the Duke of Norfolk, which sounds grand until you realise he's broke, incompetent and barely scraping by. Your mother, Jocasta Culpeper, comes from better stock, and through her, you inherit connections to court life that will shape everything ahead. Still, you're no Anne Boleyn. Not yet. You toddle around as one of many children in a chaotic household. Your dad is frequently absent or drunk or bankrupt, or all three. But here's the kicker. Your family name, Howard, is one of the most powerful in England. Even if your immediate kin are a hot mess, you've got an uncle who is the Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, a top advisor to the king. That's your golden ticket, even if it's hidden under layers of dysfunction and debt. As a child, you're sent off to live in the household of your step-grandmother, Agnes Tilney, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. Think of it like being shipped off to an elite boarding school, except the curriculum is a little sketchy. You're supposed to be learning courtly manners, music, reading and sewing. Instead, the place is more like a hormonal summer camp. The girls sleep dormitory style in a single large room with little adult supervision. Late-night gossip, stolen kisses, and musical tutors who overstep boundaries. It's all happening under that roof. This is where young Catherine begins to gather her reputation, not as a temptress, but as a flirt, a girl glowing with curiosity and charm, with no idea how dangerous attention can be in a Tudor court. You're bright, musical, cheerful, and always craving warmth. Not bookish like some queens, not cold like others, just open and yearning. Which, in this world, might as well be a bullseye. There's one music master in particular, Henry Manox, who gives you piano lessons and a few other lessons that aren't in any curriculum. You're maybe 13. He's a grown man. Let's be real. It's gross. But back then, no one talks about grooming or consent. People whisper, snicker, and let it slide. Then comes Francis Dereham, another man who takes more than he should. With him, there are letters, promises, and even rumours you might have called each other husband and wife. Though whether it was legal or just some twisted teen fantasy is still debated today. Was it love? Was it coercion? Scholars argue endlessly, but one thing's certain. These early experiences set the stage for how people will judge you later, not as a teenager caught in adult power games, but as a manipulative temptress. The truth is less convenient and a lot messier. You spend your days at the Duchess's estate in Lambeth, across the river from Westminster. You walk gardens with embroidered gloves, practice your lute, giggle behind hands with the other girls, and keep dangerous secrets stuffed under your mattress. You are, in every way, a product of a crumbling aristocracy, groomed for greatness without protection. Meanwhile, England itself is in full flux. Henry VIII has already divorced Catherine of Aragon, executed Anne Boleyn, your cousin by the way, fun family tree, and lost Jane Seymour in childbirth. Now he's on wife number 4, Anne of Cleves, and let's just say, it's not going well. He calls her a Flanders mare. Yikes. This is the world you're growing up in, a world of unstable queens, unpredictable kings, and a court that devours the naive. Then, the court remembers you exist. Your uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, pulls strings. Anne of Cleves' marriage is failing spectacularly, and Henry is hunting for fresh prey. Companionship. The Duke sees you, now about 15 or 16, and thinks, why not Catherine? She's young, she's beautiful, and she can help us rise even higher. You're summoned to court to serve as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Anne. That's a big step up, but more importantly, it's a move into Henry's orbit. And he notices. The first time he sees you, you're glowing in soft silks. cheeks flushed from dancing, laughter trailing behind you like perfume. He's 49, gout-ridden, morbidly obese and increasingly paranoid. But you're springtime incarnate, a walking rose garden. He's hooked. And you're confused, flattered, maybe a little horrified, but you know better than to say no to a king. And just like that, the trap is set. You haven't even put on the crown yet, and the walls are already moving inward, but you can't see that. You only feel the sudden rush of jewels, of power, of being wanted. It feels like love, but it's a spotlight, and in Henry's court, a spotlight always burns. You arrive at court breathless, half dizzy, swept up in the clamour of horns, perfume and silk. You're still just a teenager, yet everything about the palace feels like it was made to disorient you. Servants drift along the walls like ghosts, tapestries billow when the doors swing open. Courtiers eye you not as a girl but as a piece of living currency, your value measured in favour, beauty, and the Duke of Norfolk's political ambitions. You're here to serve Queen Anne of Cleves, Henry's fourth wife, who mostly keeps to herself. She doesn't speak much English, and her marriage to Henry is barely functioning, if you can even call it a marriage. It's widely known the king finds her unattractive. You learn quickly that her touch repels him, her laugh grates on him, and their wedding night was a complete disaster. People say he couldn't even bring himself to consummate the union. Not that anyone needed confirmation. He practically announced it to the Privy Council. That's where you come in. At first you do your duty. You help the Queen dress, attend her at meals, and smile sweetly when spoken to. But you also dance, and sing, and laugh. You're alive in a court obsessed with control. And the king notices. He sees you glide across the floor during a masque, red hair shimmering in the candlelight, your eyes wide with mischief. You don't approach him, no one dares, but he starts asking about you. Who's the pretty girl at Anne's side? Is she noble? Is she spoken for? Suddenly you find yourself summoned. Not for a scolding, but for a walk with the king. He's older, so much older than you imagined. His face is bloated, his breath stale, and his leg ulcer stinks. No one will say it, but everyone smells it. Still, he's charming in his own theatrical, heavy-footed way. He flatters you, compares your cheeks to roses, calls you his little rose without a thorn. It's grotesque and thrilling all at once. You laugh, curtsy, and play the part. And it works. Too well. In a matter of weeks, Henry is obsessed. You're invited to private dinners. You're given gowns far too fine for a lady-in-waiting. The Queen notices, of course. Everyone does. But Anne of Cleves, she says nothing. She may not love her position, but she loves her head and intends to keep it. Then comes the great annulment. It's humiliatingly swift. Henry declares the marriage never consummated, therefore invalid, and Anne, to her eternal credit, agrees without a fuss. She gets a generous settlement and a few palaces. She even calls Henry her beloved brother. She knows the game and plays it flawlessly. And you win, or at least it seems that way. The king proposes, or rather, he declares. You don't really have a say. You smile, nod, and let yourself be dressed in velvet and pearls. The wedding is rushed, held in a private chapel with only a few witnesses. No grand fanfare, no procession through London, just a teenage girl becoming queen overnight, and trying not to tremble too visibly. Now you're Queen of England, 17, maybe 18. You wear scarlet velvet and golden embroidery, and your hair is braided with rubies. But the crown is heavy, and it digs into your temples more than you expected. At court, everything changes. You no longer serve, you're the one being served. Everyone bows to you, calls you Majesty, and watches your every move with the eyes of serpents. The king showers you with gifts, gems, gowns, even properties. He calls you his jewel, his dove, his salvation. You smile until your cheeks hurt. But behind the scenes, you're lonely, terrifyingly so. You have no true friends. Your ladies-in-waiting, most of them chosen by your Howard relatives, are spies first and confidants never. You're expected to be obedient, pious, fertile, and always cheerful. Henry is mercurial, delighted by your laughter one day, brooding in silence the next. His leg oozes, and he needs help getting dressed. He's no knight from the fairy tales. He's a decaying monarch clinging to youth through you. You perform your duties, but no pregnancy comes. And in Tudor England, that's dangerous. A queen who doesn't produce heirs is a queen on borrowed time. The people love you at first. You're young, vibrant, and such a contrast to Anne of Cleves. But whispers begin almost immediately. Some say you're too flirtatious. Others call you reckless. You move through court with the grace of a dancer, but no one forgets your girlhood in Lambeth, your liaisons, your past. It's not public knowledge yet, but it will be. Even your cousin, the late Queen Anne Boleyn, haunts your story. She too was dazzling, flirtatious, and brought low by charges of infidelity. You know how her tale ended. Everyone does. Still, you can't stop yourself from craving warmth. The king's affection is performative and possessive. He wants a doll, not a wife. You want something else, something real, something that doesn't smell like rotten power. That's when Thomas Culpepper reappears. A member of the king's privy chamber, he's handsome, witty, and dangerous. And you've noticed him for months. You know how to smile just long enough to let your hand linger when passing him a cup. You both know this dance, but acting on it, that's a gamble with your life. And yet, you're still 17, or maybe 18. The numbers blur, but the need for love is sharp as the blade waiting somewhere ahead. Here's the thing no one tells you about queenship. It's a performance you can never stop giving, even in private, even in tears. And when you crack the mask, when you show hunger, desire, imperfection, they'll pounce. They always do. But for now you play your part. You smile, you curtsy, and you hope your secrets stay secrets. For now. You're deep in the palace now, deeper than any girl from Lambeth could have dreamed. Draped in brocade and rings, crowned and praised, you glide through halls that echo with flattery and danger. But underneath it all, beneath the silks and titles and shallow courtesies, you're still just Catherine. Still the girl who once laughed too loudly in a crowded dormitory. Still the girl who gave away too much of herself thinking it might be love. And that girl hasn't gone anywhere. She's just hidden, like a fox in velvet. Now that you're queen, you have your own apartments. High-ceilinged rooms with gold-threaded tapestries, carved wooden panels, and windows that catch the pale English light just right. You hold court, receive gifts, and smile through tedious ceremonies. But when the lords leave and the candles burn low, you're alone. And not the nice kind of alone where you can read or nap. The kind of alone where the walls seem to press in and you can hear your own pulse. That's when you start making mistakes again. It begins subtly. A glance held a little too long, a question asked a little too sweetly, a chambermaid allowed too much freedom because she knows too much. Her name is Joan Bulmer, and she knew you back at Lambeth. She was there for the night whispers, the giggles, and the forbidden rendezvous, and she could ruin you with a single breath if she wanted. So instead of keeping her at a distance, you bring her close. Make her a lady-in-waiting even. Not because you trust her, but because you're terrified not to. And then there's Thomas Culpepper. Oh, Thomas. He's dashing, of course, and smug in that way only favoured courtiers can be. The kind of man who leans just a little too close when he whispers. The kind who calls you your grace with a smirk that says he's thinking something else entirely. You flirt with him. You don't mean to, not really. But there it is. That electricity. That flutter in your stomach that has nothing to do with duty and everything to do with craving. A craving for something real in a world that feels hollow and scripted. You know better. You know what happened to Anne Boleyn. You know that the court is full of eyes. But still, you start to write. The letters are foolish, heartfelt, dramatic, desperate. You call him beloved. You say you miss him. You hint at meetings and secret promises. You never quite say the worst thing, but it doesn't matter. The implication is there. And implications in Henry's court are enough to destroy you. One letter you send him, delivered by your lady-in-waiting, Lady Rochford no less, says, "I long to see you, and I trust you more than any living man." You sign it, "Yours, as long as life endures." It's beautiful, it's tragic, and it's basically a written confession. But it's not just letters. There are meetings too, arranged by Lady Rochford, who once served Anne Boleyn and seems to have learned nothing. She organises nighttime visits, short, secret ones, under the guise of talks or advice. Maybe nothing physical happens, maybe it does. No one knows for sure. Historians have argued for centuries. Was it love? Lust? Just two people clinging to something human in a palace built on control? There's no hard proof, only the fog of suspicion and betrayal. What's certain is that you were reckless, and not in the bold, political way Elizabeth or I would one day be. You're reckless like a teenager who thinks no one will ever find out, like someone who still believes in second chances, and in the Tudor court, that kind of hope is fatal. Meanwhile, the king is oblivious, at least at first. He parades you around like a prize, shows you off at feasts, kisses your hand with public affection. He calls you his rose without a thorn, again and again, until even your enemies gag at the phrase. But behind the scenes, people are starting to talk. The old wolves, like Archbishop Cranmer, begin to sniff something rotten beneath the perfume. Culpeper isn't exactly discreet either. He's been in trouble before, accused of rape in fact. The case was buried, but the rumours linger. And now he's getting too close to the Queen. That makes him dangerous, and interesting, and eventually doomed. Your past too won't stay buried. Francis Derham, your old flame from Lambeth, resurfaces at court, hoping for a position. He assumes, wrongly, that you'll reward his silence with favours. You don't. Instead, you panic. You bring him into your household as a secretary, trying to contain him, but that just gives him more access, and more time to talk, and talk he does, to the wrong people, in the wrong tone. Soon, your past isn't just whispered in corners, it's carried on the lips of powerful men. Cranmer gets wind of it. He tells Henry, gently, carefully, that your virginity may not have been intact when you married him. That alone, in Henry's eyes, is treason, fraud, a betrayal of the holiest kind. Henry doesn't believe it at first. He shakes, cries, calls it slander. Then he orders an investigation. And when that investigation starts turning up letters, testimonies, confessions, everything changes. You, meanwhile, know none of this yet. You're still playing Queen, still ordering gowns, still smiling for portraits, still sneaking glances at Culpeper during Mass, and every moment feels like it might burst from the weight of your secrets. One of the court's stranger rumours? That you and Culpeper met in your private chapel and carved initials into the wood of a pew. No one's ever found that pew, but the story lives on in ghost tours and gossip books. Whether it's true or not, it perfectly captures the mood. Doomed love wrapped in velvet, pretending it won't end in blood. For now you still wear the crown, but it's slipping. And somewhere deep in the palace, a block is being dusted off. An axe is being sharpened. The king is changing, and you're still writing letters. You're standing in the centre of your own masquerade. Every day you move through the glittering halls of Whitehall like a queen out of a fairy tale. Roses in your hair, embroidery laced with gold, courtiers trailing behind you like petals. And yet you feel it in your bones. Something's off. The smiles are a little tighter. The laughter doesn't last as long. And when you walk past a group of noblemen, they quiet too quickly. It's like someone's pulling a curtain closed just before you enter the room. Still, you try to ignore it. You tell yourself it's nothing, that you're just imagining things. You've gotten used to the weight of the crown and the rhythm of the court, how it rises and falls like a stormy tide. You're used to whispers. You've survived on them. But then Joan Bulmer starts acting different. The maid who once helped you hide love letters now fumbles through your jewellery box like her hands are shaking. She won't meet your eyes. Lady Rochford, your co-conspirator in secrecy, keeps dropping things. Important things. Like her nerve. Like the name Culpeper during a half-whispered conversation that you're pretty sure wasn't supposed to include you. And when a message arrives, summoning you not to the king's side but to a private meeting with members of the Privy Council, you finally feel your stomach drop through the floor. You don't know this yet, but Cranmer has delivered a letter to Henry. In it he carefully, strategically lays out the problem. You, his young bride, his so-called rose without a thorn, might not have been the innocent he thought. Worse, you might not be faithful now. Henry's reaction is volatile. That morning he's doting. By evening he's missing from supper. The following day he cancels court entirely and vanishes into his chambers. Rumour spreads like fever. The king has collapsed. The king is weeping. The king is preparing to annul another marriage. Meanwhile you're taken aside. Not arrested, yet, but you're no longer free to wander the palace. The atmosphere changes instantly. Guards who used to stand at respectful attention now seem to block your exits. Your ladies are dismissed one by one. You ask questions, but no one answers. Everyone just bows and disappears. Then they come for Derham. He's seized, interrogated, and pushed so hard he folds like a card tower. He tells them about Lambeth, about the kisses and the promises, about the time he called you his wife. It's enough to send ripples all the way to the tower, but it's not enough to seal your fate, not yet. What they need is proof of adultery while queen. That's the fatal line. So they go looking for Culpepper. He resists longer. He has more to lose. But when his chamber is ransacked and letters are found, some in your handwriting, it's over. He confesses, sort of. He admits to meetings, to feelings, but insists it never got physical. That's the line he draws, trying to preserve his life by a sliver of technicality. You'll both cling to that detail later. It won't matter. Back in your apartments, time dissolves. You're not officially imprisoned, but you might as well be. The tapestries on the walls seem to press in. You stop sleeping. Food loses its taste. You replay every mistake, every look, every note, every whispered joke at a banquet, and wonder which moment betrayed you. Then it happens. Guards arrive, grim-faced, and tell you to come with them. You're arrested. They don't even let you scream. They just take your hands, strip your title, and lead you out a side door like a criminal. The palace that once adored you now seems to recoil from your very presence. Servants look away, doors close behind you, and then you're out in the cold. You're taken to Sion House, not the tower, yet. They call it a holding location, like that makes it better. But Sion feels just as much like a prison. You're placed in a chamber with barred windows, your belongings searched, your letters seized. You're allowed no visitors except officials. Your hair, your gowns, even your jewellery. They all become suspect. And in Sion House you break. There's no dramatic collapse, no Shakespearean monologue, just silence. Days of silence. They say you weep without sound, pace the room endlessly, tear your sleeves from nerves. One morning, a servant finds you curled up beneath the window, whispering your own name like you're trying to remember who you are. Because who are you now? Not queen. Not wife. Not even Catherine, really. Just a girl whose every secret is now public currency. A girl being dissected by councilmen like a specimen in a jar. You're eventually interrogated. They ask questions so calmly it makes your skin crawl. Did you love Derham? Did you call him husband? Did you commit adultery? What about Culpepper? Who arranged the meetings? What happened in the bedchamber? Every question peels you back until there's almost nothing left, and every answer traps you further. Here's the real twist. You admit to your past with Derham. You say it was a mistake. You say he forced you, that you were too young to understand, that you thought it was love. Historians will debate forever whether you're telling the truth, or just trying to survive, but the damage is done. By confessing to premarital relations, you're admitting you deceived the king, which legally means your marriage was invalid, and that's all Henry needs. He doesn't speak to you, not once, not directly, not in a note. He simply issues orders. You're to be stripped of the title of queen. Your household is dissolved, your family questioned. Several of your Howard relatives are imprisoned. Your uncle, the all-powerful Duke of Norfolk, quietly disappears from court. Everyone's running for cover, and you're left behind like wreckage. The last thing to go is hope, not all at once, but piece by piece. When the guards stop pretending to be polite, when the meals get smaller, when you hear that Culpepper and Derham are to be executed and not gently. You ask if you'll see the king. They tell you no. You ask if you can explain. They say nothing. You ask if he still loves you, and someone finally answers. His Majesty no longer speaks your name. The morning is grey when they finally move you. Fog clings to the edges of the road like a reluctant curtain, as if the weather itself doesn't want to witness what's coming. You're bundled into a barge, cloaked in wool and silence, and ferried down the Thames like contraband. The water slaps against the hull with slow, steady indifference. You don't speak. No one does. Even the guards seem nervous. Maybe because they know they're not transporting a criminal. Not really. They're transporting a girl the king once called his rose without a thorn. And now? Now you're just a ghost with a pulse. The Tower of London rises ahead, grim and pale against the sky. You've seen it before, of course. Everyone at court has. It's part of the landscape, part of the threat. But you've never entered it like this. Not as a prisoner. Not under orders signed by the very man who once kissed your hands and called you his salvation. Your feet hit the stone landing and a strange calm settles over you. Maybe it's shock. Maybe it's something worse. A part of you still doesn't believe this is real. That it will go this far. You think, maybe if I explain, maybe if he just sees me again, it'll change things. But no message comes. No pardon, no king. Just the cold embrace of the tower's gates opening like jaws. They take you to the same royal apartments Anne Boleyn once stayed in, just before her execution. You know this. You've heard the stories. You can almost feel her there, the way people feel ghosts pressing gently against their spine. The walls are the same. The shadows stretch in the same direction. The air, thick with damp history, doesn't let you forget for even a second what this place is meant for. At first, you still have some comforts. A fire, a soft blanket, servants who speak gently. They haven't been told to hate you. Not yet. But you notice how they won't look you in the eye for long. You hear them whisper when they think you're asleep. About Culpeper, about Derham, about how the king cried, they say, when he first heard of your betrayal. You wonder what he's doing now, whether he thinks of you, whether he regrets anything. Probably not. Henry's brand of grief is loud and vengeful. He breaks things when he's hurt, sometimes people, and this time, you're the thing he's breaking. Word arrives that Culpeper and Derham are dead, executed at Tyburn. You ask how. No one wants to tell you, but eventually someone slips, with that particular brand of morbid English politeness. Derham was hanged, drawn, and quartered. You blink. You don't understand at first. The words come slow. Hanged, drawn, quartered. It's not just execution. It's theatre. It's a message carved into a man's body. And he wasn't even guilty of adultery after your marriage. Just before. Just a footnote in your story. And yet they ripped him open like a cautionary tale. Culpeper was luckier, if you can call it that. He was beheaded. Clean. Official. No fanfare. And Lady Rochford, arrested. The woman who once helped coordinate your secret meetings is now babbling in her cell, according to rumour. Her mind unravelling, or maybe just playing a clever trick. Some say she's gone mad to avoid execution. Others say she was always a little cracked. Either way, she's next. The tower becomes quieter by the hour. They don't let you speak to anyone now. Your meals come on wooden trays. Your clothes are taken. You're given a simpler gown, rough at the collar, with no jewels, no colour, just grey wool and hopelessness. Then, finally, they tell you, you're to be executed. The words come like a velvet hammer, delivered by a man who's clearly reciting from memory, his voice flat. For treason against the king's majesty. He might as well be reading a grocery list. You nod. You say nothing. You sit back down. The floor sways under your feet even though the earth isn't moving. They give you 2 days. That night you don't sleep. You don't cry either. You just stare at the ceiling and think of your childhood, of the music room in Lambeth, of Francis Derham's boyish grin, of Culpeper's hands, of the time you laughed so hard at a mask that wine came out your nose and the king actually smiled. You think of the letters you wrote, foolish and brave. You wonder if anyone kept them. The next morning you ask for a block. Not the block, just a wooden one. To practice. The guards look at you like you're mad, but they bring it anyway. A simple thing. Not polished, just functional. You kneel beside it, again and again, teaching your body how not to tremble. You don't want to flinch. You don't want to scream. You want, if anything, for it to be quick. Later, you write letters. Not to the king, he won't read them, but to your family, to your brother, if he's still free, to the Duchess of Norfolk. You try to explain yourself, or maybe not explain, just be remembered. Your execution is scheduled for the morning of February 13th, 1542. The night before, they say, you sleep like a child, peacefully. Or maybe you were just too exhausted to do anything else. A girl can only hold herself together for so long. You wake up before dawn. The world is quiet, almost gentle. A mist hangs over the tower green. You dress slowly, carefully. A velvet gown in dark crimson. No jewellery, no veil. You tie your hair back. You want your neck exposed. You want to make it easy. The guards lead you outside. The executioner is already waiting, and beyond him, the block. It's real now. Not something to fear in the distance. Not something you can rehearse away. It's just there. Final. Solid. Waiting. You take a deep breath. The last one you'll ever take as Catherine Howard, Queen of England. And you walk forward. The tower green is still soaked in early morning chill, the kind that clings to your sleeves and sinks straight into your skin. A fine mist hovers just above the ground, curling like ghostly tendrils around the boots of the small crowd gathered to watch. You wonder, do they feel the cold, or are they too busy pretending? They're not here to see a girl die? You were expecting more people, honestly, but the king has kept this one private. Too messy, too embarrassing. It's not a state affair like Anne Boleyn's execution. No drums, no scaffold built tall above the crowd, just a quiet green square surrounded by stone, some pressed officials, a few guards, and a single executioner waiting beside a low block of dark wood. You're only 19. There's something disturbingly small about everything. The block isn't much higher than your knees. The crowd isn't large enough to be a spectacle. Even the wind seems to hush as you approach. Maybe it's mercy. Maybe the world knows it's about to take something too young and too breakable. You walk slowly, each step measured. Not out of ceremony, but because your knees might give out if you move too fast. You've heard tales of people dragged to their deaths, screaming and clawing the air. You won't be one of them. If you can't be remembered for long, at least let them say you had dignity. There's straw spread across the green to soak up the blood. That detail sticks with you. Straw, not cloth, not silk. Just hay, like you're a farm animal. Your shoes crunch against it as you take your place. You notice the executioner is young, not a man with grey hair and tired eyes. Young, like you, maybe a little older. He doesn't meet your gaze. Someone asks if you have any final words. You hesitate, then kneel down. The fabric of your gown pulls around you like a wilted rose. You place your hands in your lap. You've thought about what to say for days. Something noble, something defiant. But when you open your mouth, your voice is softer than you expect. I die a queen, you begin, but I would rather die the wife of Culpeper. A hush follows, sharp and brutal. It is not the pious statement they hoped for, not a prayer, not an apology, but it is the truth, or at least it is your truth, and you've been denied that long enough. Somewhere nearby someone gasps, maybe a noble, maybe a guard. The young executioner tenses, but still, no one moves. You lay your head down on the block, placing your chin just right so your neck stretches gently over the worn wood. You can smell the faint metallic scent of old blood. Someone else's, maybe many others. This block has served dozens, perhaps hundreds. You wonder if it remembered Anne Boleyn, or if it forgets the way men do. The breeze picks up. You feel it lift a strand of your hair. The ground is hard against your knees, but you don't adjust. You barely breathe. There's a pause, then a whisper of movement behind you, the sound of boots shifting in gravel, the dull drag of steel, and the slow, heavy breath of the man holding it. You close your eyes. You picture the gardens at Lambeth tangled and green, full of laughter and danger. You picture Culpeper, his smirk, his voice, the way he touched your wrist like it meant everything. You picture music, warm, summer air, a different life, one where you weren't a pawn in someone else's game. And then, with shocking clarity, you think, I wonder if anyone will say my name 100 years from now. The blade falls. They say your death is quick, that the executioner did his job well, that you didn't cry out, that your head dropped cleanly into the straw with barely a sound. Some say the body jerked once, out of reflex. Others say it didn't move at all, that you simply went nonetheless, like a candle being blown out. You don't get a tomb, not really. You're buried in an unmarked grave in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, right there in the tower, just a few feet away from your cousin Anne Boleyn. Two queens who loved too much, or too wrong, or just too loudly. The king doesn't attend your funeral. He doesn't even speak of you again. A royal edict follows declaring your name stripped from memory. Your coat of arms removed from official records. Your image taken down from court paintings. He marries again, of course. Number 6, Catherine Parr. Calm, educated, devout. She survives him, mostly by staying quiet. But you're gone. Officially erased. Unofficially, though. That's where things get interesting. People whisper. They always do. The court that buried you in silence keeps bringing you up when it thinks no one's listening. Ladies tell tales to their daughters about the young queen who died for love. Servants mutter that they still hear screams near the chapel on foggy nights, that a figure in crimson velvet runs through the corridors, headless, mourning. A few decades later, a play emerges, anonymous, featuring a tragic queen who dies with her heart broken and her secrets intact. Scholars will argue if it was about you, others say it was Anne. But either way, your ghost is on stage now. and in time they'll write you back into history. Not as a cautionary tale, not just as Henry's fifth wife, but as Catherine Howard, the teen queen who dared to love while wearing a crown sharpened with expectation. Even if your body was buried like refuse, your story refuses to lie still. And in the end, that's something. The court doesn't pause. It never does. Even as the straw is still damp with your blood, servants are already scrubbing the block clean, and tailors are stitching gowns for the next queen. Because there's always a next queen. That's how Henry works. Like a man shopping for something that fits, discarding one when it rips or stains or speaks too much. The palace doesn't mourn. It reorganises. You, however, are not so easily wiped away. Even in death, you linger. In the days that follow your execution, there's a particular unease in the royal corridors. People speak more softly. Ladies cross themselves more often. Henry retreats further into isolation, barely emerging except for state matters. He doesn't smile. He doesn't sing. He spends long hours staring at tapestries or mumbling to himself about betrayal and how deeply, deeply alone he is. He keeps telling people he was tricked, deceived, played for a fool by a girl who pretended to be pure. The old guard nods, murmurs sympathies, and silently moves on. But others, they remember you differently. Servants talk in hushed voices about how you used to laugh in the garden, head thrown back, eyes sparkling with something fierce and young and unbroken. They whisper about the way your presence warmed a room, how even the grumpiest chambermaids caught themselves smiling when you passed. Some of your ladies-in-waiting keep small trinkets of yours tucked in drawers, hair combs, scraps of silk, dried flowers once picked during a stroll along the Thames, and late at night they say there's a presence in the Queen's gallery, a shift in the air, a cold that presses against the spine. And sometimes, if you're alone and unlucky, you might hear footsteps, light ones, the kind that would belong to a girl in slippers, running, always running. But before we go full ghost story, let's talk about the surviving players of your short, sharp tragedy. First, the Howard family. They were supposed to rise with you. That was the plan. A niece on the throne, a network of cousins and uncles pulling the strings behind the curtain. But instead of climbing, they fell hard and fast. Your uncle, the all-powerful Duke of Norfolk, distances himself so quickly it's almost comical. He denounces you, claims ignorance, begs mercy. He survives. Barely. But other Howards aren't so lucky. Many are arrested, some are executed. The family's name becomes a cautionary whisper for years. Then there's Lady Rochford, Jane Boleyn, your accomplice, the architect of your secret meetings with Culpeper. She's brought to trial not long after your death. But there's a problem. She's broken, mentally unravelling according to every guard who speaks of her. She rants about shadows, says Anne Boleyn talks to her in her dreams, calls herself a puppet caught in a play written by ghosts. And here's where Tudor law throws in a twist. Traditionally, the insane can't be executed, but Parliament decides that, for her, they'll make an exception. So they pass a law allowing the execution of the mad, just for her. She dies not long after you, her head taken on the same block, her story buried even deeper than yours. History will argue for centuries whether she lost her mind out of guilt, or whether she was only ever pretending. And then, of course, there's Culpeper. He left behind very little. A confession filled with half-truths and damage control. He claimed you loved him, yes, but that nothing physical happened, that it was only feelings, just foolish letters and long glances and stolen meetings where the air between you said more than any touch ever could. He tried to protect himself, tried to draw a line that might save his neck. It didn't work. He was executed days before you, buried in the common graveyard, forgotten by nearly everyone but you. Historians will debate forever whether you two were lovers in body, or just in heart, whether it was a physical affair or simply emotional treason. And really, does it matter? In Henry's world, the crime wasn't what you did, it was what you felt, and feeling anything for someone who wasn't him, that was enough. One particularly strange detail, something whispered through the court like a riddle, was the rumour that Culpeper had a keepsake of yours with him at the time of his arrest. A locket, they say, gold. Inside it, a lock of red gold hair, yours. Whether he wore it out of love or out of fear is anyone's guess. It's never found after his execution. Some say a guard stole it. Others think it's still buried with him, pressed close to his chest, the last warmth he ever held. Henry, meanwhile, moves on with exhausting speed. He marries Catherine Parr about a year later. She's everything you weren't. Calm, educated, mature, but also smart. Smart enough to hide any trace of herself that might cause trouble. She plays the game, and she survives. But even she must have known that one wrong step could turn her into the next name etched in Tower legend. She keeps her love letters hidden, her thoughts silent. She watches the wind like any good wife of Henry must. Still, people compare her to you, silently, unfairly. She's the caution, you're the warning. And so, your story slips into folklore. They start calling you the unhappy queen. They turn your short life into a morality tale for noble daughters. Don't be like Catherine, they say. Don't fall for flattery. Don't trust letters. Don't forget your place. But the irony, of course, is that you never had a place. You were born into a family that tossed you to wolves, raised in a home with no walls, thrust into a marriage where affection was a weapon, and punished for trying to feel anything genuine in a world designed to crush anything soft. You never had a chance, and maybe that's what haunts people most. Not your crimes, not your downfall, but how inevitable it all was. How could a girl like you have survived? You couldn't. And so your story becomes a ritual, told and retold, written down by scholars, twisted by playwrights, whispered by girls in candlelit rooms who wonder if they'd have done anything differently in your place. Spoiler, they wouldn't have, because you didn't die just because of who you loved. You died because you were young. You died because you weren't allowed to be anything else. You're gone from the court, buried beneath stone and shadow, but your name still passes through lips in broken syllables. Not everyone mourns you, not openly. But among the women, especially, there's a kind of uneasy reverence. You're a reminder of what happens when a girl in silk steps an inch out of line. You're not just a fallen queen, you're a lesson, a warning stitched into the air itself. And yet, for all the cautionary tales spun in your name, people can't stop telling your story. It's too strange, too sudden, too soaked in glamour and grief, like a candle burning at both ends that flares once, bright and blinding before the room goes dark. There are strange details that stick in people's minds, odd, small things they repeat like bits of superstition. How you practiced placing your head on a block, how you wore red on the day of your execution, not for vanity, but because red was the colour of martyrdom, how the king refused to see your body afterward, even though he once claimed he couldn't bear to be apart from you for more than a day, and how, in your final hours, you supposedly clutched a miniature prayer book so hard that the leather cover tore beneath your fingernails. Are those stories true? No one can say for sure, but they feel true. And in the world of Tudor gossip, that's more than enough. Behind the scenes, the government tries to seal your story up. They confiscate every letter, every trinket, every loose end they can gather. They erase you from records where possible, and revise others to fit the narrative. Catherine Howard, faithless wife, executed for high treason. That's the version Henry prefers. That's the official version, the one to be handed down to future courts, to future kings. But it never quite sticks. Because people remember. They remember your laugh, your grace, your terrifying brilliance. They remember the way the king softened when you entered a room, and how different everything felt just for a moment. You weren't like the others. You weren't a diplomat like Catherine of Aragon, or a fox like Anne Boleyn, or a saint like Jane Seymour. You weren't calculated. You were alive, radiantly, recklessly alive, and the court couldn't handle that. Not in a girl, not in a queen. But let's rewind just for a moment. Back to the beginning. Before the crown, before the secrets, before your name was whispered behind gloved hands. What if, at 13, someone had noticed? What if someone, anyone, had pulled you aside at Lambeth and said, "This isn't love, you're being used"? What if your family had protected you instead of pushing you forward like a pawn on a blood-stained chessboard? What if Henry had chosen someone else? What if Culpeper had walked away? It's tempting to play that game, the what-if game, a pastime of historians and romantics alike. But the reality is, in the Tudor court, there were no clean choices, just variations of danger. And you, Catherine, danced into the fire with your eyes wide open, and no one ever bothered to ask if you understood the rules. One debate that still fuels late-night scholarly arguments, preferably over wine, is whether you were a victim of grooming or a dangerous flirt who manipulated the king. There's no clear answer. You were both, and neither. You were a teenager, not a child, not a woman, just a teenager trying to survive in a world that treated innocence as a crime and experience as treason. Some historians argue you were far more cunning than people give you credit for, that you knew what you were doing when you accepted Henry's courtship, that you understood the risk in loving Culpeper, that you arranged the meetings with deliberate skill. Others claim you were a pawn, too young, too unprotected, swept into a role designed to consume you. The truth probably lives somewhere in the uncomfortable middle, and maybe that's why your story still haunts people, because it refuses to be neat. You weren't the virgin queen. You weren't the seductress. You were something far harder to classify. Back in the tower, a peculiar thing happens. After your execution, several staff members report hearing footsteps in the corridor outside your former rooms. At first, they laugh it off, old stone settling, or perhaps a guard's imagination. But then it happens again, and again, always just before dawn, always light, like slippered feet. Some claim to see a blur of red disappear down the hallway. Others refuse to sleep in that part of the building ever again. Eventually the room is sealed off for maintenance, which in Tudor speak translates loosely to "we're too spooked to deal with this." And so, the legend of your ghost is born. The Screaming Queen, they call you. Later, as ghost stories pass through generations, your tale becomes a staple of tower tours. Guides tell wide-eyed tourists that your spirit can still be heard running toward the chapel door, begging for mercy even after death, that your voice echoes in the stone itself, that you're not at peace. It's a bit theatrical, yes, and perhaps unfair to reduce your life to a haunted hallway, but there's something fitting in it too, because you were always running. Toward love, toward danger, toward something that felt like freedom, even if it killed you. Outside the tower, your name begins to drift into literature. Anonymous poems, ballads sung by minstrels, some tragic, some scandalous, some wildly inaccurate. A century later, writers will tinker with your story, moulding it into cautionary drama. You'll become a stock character, the beautiful girl who rose too high, fell too fast, and left a mess in her wake. But in secret corners of court, there are still those who speak of you with something like fondness. Not admiration, no one dares go that far, but something closer to grief. The queen who laughed too loudly. The queen who wrote love letters in a palace made of knives. The queen who, for a few brief months, reminded everyone what joy looked like before it was crushed under the weight of expectation. And what about the king? He never publicly repents, never admits he was wrong. But some claim that in the last months of his life, fat, sick, and slipping toward death, he dreams of you, that he murmurs your name when no one's listening, that he once ordered a locket burned, but changed, his mind at the last second, that somewhere in the haze of decay and memory, he remembered the girl who danced for him in scarlet and laughed like she believed in forever. By now, your name has become a kind of soft echo, not quite silenced, not quite alive. It drifts through Tudor history like a feather caught in a draught, rarely landing but always present. Every few years someone picks it up again. A playwright in need of a tragic heroine, a historian flipping through half-burned letters, a schoolgirl reading about queens and stopping just for a moment when she reaches yours. They wonder what it felt like, to be chosen, to be worshipped, and then destroyed. And the strange thing is, despite everything, despite the silence of the crown and the cold stone of the tower, you're still fascinating. You, Catherine Howard, a girl whose reign barely lasted 2 seasons, continue to occupy a strange, glittering little corner of England's collective imagination. Because your story doesn't follow the rules. You weren't great. You weren't terrible. You weren't long-suffering or gloriously victorious. You were just real, messy, beautiful, heartbreakingly doomed. Some say that's why you linger, not just in ghost stories, but in memory. Now let's return for a moment to those letters, the love notes, the whispers scratched into paper by candlelight, folded tight and passed between hands like stolen fruit. Most were seized by Henry's men during the investigation. Most were destroyed, but not all. A few fragments survive, preserved by accident or by someone with a conscience. One line, attributed to you, reads, "My heart is with you always, in this place where I cannot be." It's simple, Too simple. Some scholars think it's a forgery, a romantic flourish added by later writers. Others insist it's yours, a final echo before the silence. And that brings us to the ultimate question: what was it really like to be you? To be Catherine Howard, Queen of England, and know that your crown sat on a knife's edge, that every smile, every dance, every whispered word could become evidence? Imagine trying to sleep with that weight. Imagine trying to love anyone at all. You lived in a world where youth wasn't innocence, it was liability. You were punished not just for loving the wrong man, but for daring to act like you could love at all, as if emotion was a weapon, as if warmth itself was treason. And for all the careful records the Tudor court kept, every banquet accounted for, every title inked and filed, there are still things no one can explain, like why you kept writing Culpeper after things started to unravel, why you trusted Lady Rochford, why you didn't run, why in those final days you never once begged the king for mercy. Some say it was pride, others say you knew he'd already made up his mind. But there's one account, whispered through generations, that you once said, "If I must die, I will die standing." Not kneeling, standing. That line stuck with people, enough that it made its way into ballads, into dramatisations, even into children's school books long after the monarchy moved on. It doesn't matter that it might not be true. The idea of it is powerful. The image of you, too young, too clever, too bruised, facing death with something like defiance. It's not what Henry wanted. He wanted you to be the villain in his version of events, the seductress who betrayed him, the foolish girl who dared to pretend she was queen. But instead, you became the one thing he never quite knew how to destroy: unforgettable. Meanwhile, the Tudor court tries its best to erase the chaos you left behind. By the time Henry marries Catherine Parr, everything has been cleaned up. On paper, anyway. The court is tidier, the Queen is more obedient, the gossip is quieter, but behind the painted smiles and polished etiquette, everyone remembers. No one says your name aloud, but it's always there, floating, especially among the women, because it's the women who understand your story most intimately. Not just the scandal, but the machinery that chewed you up. They know what it means to smile when you want to scream, to be expected to charm, to flatter, to obey, and to be punished for failing to read minds. They know what happens when a girl's past is used as a weapon, when purity is currency, when survival means silence. You weren't the only one, just the one who didn't make it out. And as time goes on, your legacy mutates. In the Victorian age, you're turned into a romantic tragedy, a fallen woman redeemed by love. In the 20th century, you're a feminist symbol, stripped of the caricatures and seen instead as a victim of power imbalance and abuse. And now, people don't quite know what to do with you. You're not a neat package. You don't fit into tropes, and that's what keeps you interesting. Quirky fact, your name still shows up in marriage advice columns from time to time, mostly as a caution, don't be a Catherine Howard, which is ironic, considering you never got the chance to really be a wife at all. There's a cottage industry around your story, historical fiction novels, television dramatisations, costume dramas with breathy dialogue and soft lighting. Some get it wrong. Most try their best. They show you as clever, naive, sensual, tragic, manipulative, loyal. They argue about your motives like courtroom lawyers, but every version ends the same, on that block, in that gown, with a line, real or imagined, that people still quote centuries later. I die a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Culpeper. True or not, it haunts people, because it wasn't just about Culpeper, it was about being seen. He saw you. Maybe the only one who ever really did. And in a world where women were traded like property, that kind of recognition could feel like salvation. Or at least like something worth risking everything for. So, no, you weren't perfect. You weren't innocent. You made bad choices. You were impulsive and sometimes foolish. But you were also brave. You reached for something human in a world that demanded you be ornamental. And that's not a crime. That's just being alive. It starts with one letter. Just a curious scholar, centuries later, poring through dusty files at the British Library, stumbling across a marginal note in a half-forgotten document. The name Catherine Howard scribbled in tight, rushed ink beside a date. Nothing groundbreaking, just a ripple. But it leads to another, then another. And soon, you're resurrected not by royalty or fanfare, but by footnotes. Modern historians begin to reframe your story, shifting the lens from scandal to tragedy, from treason to trauma. They start asking the questions no one dared in the 16th century. What were the power dynamics between you and the men in your life? How much agency did you really have? How does a girl, barely a woman, survive a court that feeds on desire and punishes it in the same breath? You become a case study, a symbol, a teenage girl navigating the firestorm of Tudor politics without armour. Your name shows up in university lectures, TED Talks, even podcasts with snappy titles like Queens Behaving Badly or Royal Rebels and Victims. People want to understand you now, maybe even redeem you. And as your image shifts in the public imagination, it becomes clear that you're more than just a cautionary tale. You're a mirror. Because your story asks a very modern question. What happens when a girl is punished for being seen as too much, too flirty, too open, too young, too alive? It's not hard to draw lines between your world and ours, between your letters and texts sent late at night, between your banishment and a modern-day cancellation, between the way men pass judgment on your past and how women today still face scrutiny for choices that were never really choices at all. You become, unintentionally, a time-travelling figure, still relevant, still uncomfortably familiar. And let's not forget the ghost tours, because yes, your story has also been turned into nighttime entertainment. At the Tower of London, guides gather nervous tourists and dim their lanterns just before leading them into the haunted gallery, and then they tell your story. The teen queen, the secret lover, the tragic betrayal. They say your ghost runs down the hallway just before sunrise, banging on the chapel door, begging Henry for mercy. Some visitors laugh, some shiver, some swear they hear the screams, others swear they see you. One American tourist even claims you brushed past her in the Tower gift shop, just a cool wind on her neck and the faint scent of roses. The staff quietly rolls their eyes, but later a young employee doing stock in the back room glances up and sees a red-haired girl in Tudor dress standing silently near the exit. She vanishes before he can say a word. A prank? A trick of the light? Maybe. Or maybe your story won't rest. Maybe it can't. But let's step away from ghost stories for a minute and look at something far stranger. The debate over whether you were ever really queen at all. It sounds absurd, right? You wore the crown. You signed royal documents. You hosted audiences and received foreign dignitaries. But because Henry later annulled your marriage, on the grounds that you lied about your past, some legal historians argue that technically you weren't a queen in the legal sense, that you were only ever treated as one. It's a cruel irony. You lived the nightmare, you died the death, but still they want to erase the title. Still, others push back, loudly. They argue that Henry's sudden revisions don't change the reality. You were crowned, addressed as Majesty. You had a household, you were queen, maybe not for long, but long enough to matter. And here's the kicker. No matter what they decide in the dusty corners of academic circles, the world already remembers you as Queen Catherine, the one who danced too brightly, who dared to feel something real, the one whose head fell for love. You're even immortalised in rhyme, along with Henry's 5 other wives. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. You're the second beheaded, right after Anne Boleyn, neatly slotted into the rhythm. It's catchy, memorable, disturbingly cheerful considering what it represents, but it also flattens you, turns your story into a syllable. And let's be real, you were never just a syllable. You were a full sentence, maybe even a paragraph. Chaotic, warm, vulnerable, a girl trying to thread her way through a royal machine without being consumed by it. There's even a musical now. Yes, a musical where you sing, on stage in rhinestoned Tudor glam, telling your side. It's cheeky, pop-infused and surprisingly poignant. You sing about being more than just someone's wife, more than a punchline in a history book. You sing to be remembered, and they cheer, every night. Because for all the centuries of silence, people want to hear you now. They want to understand, to grieve with you, to wonder what might have been. What if you'd married someone else? What if you'd been allowed to love without fear? What if you'd been born 50, 100, 500 years later? Would you have made it out? Would you have survived? We can't know. But here's what we do know. You mattered. You left a mark. Not with war or law or empire, but with something far more dangerous, emotion. You remind us that history isn't just battles and treaties, it's people. Messy, yearning people, caught in the machinery of power. People like you, people who loved the wrong person at the wrong time and paid for it with their lives. So while others may forget, may argue, may debate, you still drift through time, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in footsteps, sometimes in spotlights and standing ovations, still running, still calling out, still refusing to disappear. It's strange how the most fragile legacies often end up being the hardest to erase. You'd think a brief, scandal-ridden reign like yours would be buried under the weight of history, the wars, the treaties, the names carved into marble. But here you are, Catherine Howard, lingering like perfume in a locked room, impossible to shake. You may not have ruled with policy or penned laws or given birth to a future monarch, but you haunt the timeline just the same, not as a ruler, as a feeling. And the feeling is this: what if no one ever protected you? That question lingers. It hangs over every retelling of your story, because the deeper anyone digs into your past, the more alarming the patterns become. From your earliest days at Lambeth in the care of your dowager step-grandmother, the so-called school for noble girls was more chaos than structure, more gossip than guidance, a place where the girls were left unchaperoned, and the men, musicians, secretaries, tutors, hovered too close. And you were so young, too young. Your first brush with affection came from Henry Mannocks, a man meant to teach you music, who instead taught you a version of desire layered in power imbalance. Modern historians point to these relationships now and use words like grooming, coercion, and abuse. But in your time, no one even blinked. Teenage girls were expected to be vessels of virtue and silence, yet somehow also seductive and polished and ready for marriage by 15. You were set up to fail from the start, and no one, not your family, not your household, not the crown, stepped in to stop it. It's easy to call you reckless. It's harder to admit that you were never given the tools to navigate what came at you. Because while your fall is famously fast, your rise is even faster, and it's built on an illusion. One moment, you're just a teenager playing court games behind Queen Anne of Cleves. The next, you're the king's new obsession, and the speed of it all is dizzying. You become Queen of England in a matter of months, your entire world transformed from candlelit music rooms to royal processions, from dormitory whispers to a palace full of surveillance. What you never had, not once, was time. Time to grow, to learn, to recover from anything. The court pushed you from one performance to another, and you, eager to belong, to be loved, gave them what they wanted. You smiled, you laughed, you pretended, until pretending felt like the only thing keeping you upright. And into that performance walked Thomas Culpeper. Let's talk about him, because it's tempting to cast him as the great love of your life, the tragic forbidden figure you died for. And sure, that story sells. It has the makings of a romance novel. Secret notes, moonlit meetings, a queen risking it all for a man who wasn't her husband. But the truth, it's murkier than that. Culpeper was charming, yes, handsome, clever. He had the king's favour and knew how to use it, but he wasn't innocent. He had a past of his own, one that included a disturbing accusation of assault that was quietly buried by his status. Not exactly Prince Charming, and yet you were drawn to him. Maybe because he looked at you like you were a person, not a symbol. Maybe because he made you feel real for once, instead of just watched. Or maybe because, like so many teenagers in impossible situations, you mistook danger for intensity. Who knows? What we do know is this. Whatever happened between you and Culpeper, it wasn't treason in the way the court defined it. You weren't trying to steal the throne. You weren't plotting betrayal. You weren't even trying to leave. You were just trying to feel something human inside a palace that stripped all of that away. But feeling, in Henry's court, was a capital offence. And when your secret surfaced, first Derham, then Culpeper, then Lady Rochford's whispered confessions, it all collapsed at once. The love letters were read aloud, your past was dragged into the daylight, and the king, humiliated yet again, chose fury over forgiveness. He needed someone to blame, and it sure as hell wasn't going to be himself. There's an old record from a court servant that claims the king staggered and wept when he first heard of your betrayal, that he was so overcome with grief that he could barely walk, that he wailed to God about being cursed with disloyal wives, But no matter how dramatic the display, it led to the same ending. He didn't ask for clarification. He didn't allow a trial. He signed the warrant, and then he turned away. Not a letter, not a visit, not even a word. You, who once lit up his table, were now a locked chamber in his memory, and the court took its cue. You became the whore queen. Your name whispered like rot. But here's the strange thing, you still had defenders. Quiet ones, of course. No one spoke up loudly in Henry's England. But in corners, people questioned. They asked why you were the only one punished so violently. Why a girl with no real power was treated as a political threat. Why your confession was considered evidence, but your pleas for understanding were ignored. Even now, scholars argue, were you complicit or were you cornered? Was your execution justice or a cover-up? The truth is, you weren't executed for betrayal. You were executed to erase the king's shame, to close the wound quickly and bury the body before it stank up the court. But bodies like yours, they don't stay buried. Your name slips through the cracks, in paintings misattributed to Anne Boleyn, in poems about doomed youth, in academic papers that dig into your psyche like archaeologists with scalpels. And in every one of these retellings you refuse to flatten, you remain messy, complicated, alive. A teenage queen who made the wrong choices, yes, but who never had the right ones to begin with. And maybe that's why you're remembered. Not as a villain, not as a hero, but as something harder to define. Human. He knows it's over the moment the letter hits his desk. A scrap of parchment folded twice, the wax seal already cracked from trembling fingers. Archbishop Cranmer has written carefully, methodically, laying out the accusations like a surgeon revealing a tumour. It's not just gossip anymore. It's a formal charge. Catherine Howard, his queen, his blossom in springtime, has betrayed him. Henry doesn't read it all at once. He sits there, alone in his chambers, his ulcerated leg throbbing under layers of linen and royal embroidery, and stares at the ink like it might rearrange itself. When he does finally read the words like unchaste, pre-contract, adultery, he doesn't react the way you might expect a king to. Not at first. No shouting, no slamming fists. Just silence. He stares at the fire until it burns a hole in his vision. You've hurt him, or rather he feels hurt. And what Henry feels becomes truth, no matter what actually happened. His anger simmers, but beneath it is something colder, humiliation. The realization that he, the most powerful man in England, has once again been played for a fool. First Anne Boleyn, now you. It's like history is mocking him, using the same script, just a new actress. He retreats from court for days, refuses visitors, cancels meetings, his appetite disappears, his bed goes unslept in. Some say he weeps, loud, dramatic, animalistic sobs that echo through the palace corridors like a storm trapped indoors. Others say he simply stares at the wall and whispers your name, not like a curse, but like a prayer gone sour. Eventually the fury comes, not the loud kind, but the deadly kind. He doesn't pace or shout or smash goblets. He writes, orders, signs, delegates the unravelling of your life with the clinical efficiency of a butcher who knows exactly where to place the knife. He sends men to question your old companions. He has your household stripped down, letters confiscated, witnesses summoned, and he refuses to see you. Not once, not even when you ask, not even when you beg. Because in Henry's mind, you're already gone. You're not his wife anymore. You're the reason he's ashamed. And Henry does not do shame. He replaces it with rage. This is the part no one talks about. The performance of male power when wounded. How instead of confronting pain, it transforms into destruction. You broke his illusion, and now he has to break you. And so he does. Behind closed doors, Cranmer conducts interviews. You're questioned, pressed, pushed. Every word is recorded, twisted, flattened into something usable. They want confirmation of sin, of conspiracy. But more than that, they want justification. Something to make the blood look clean. Something to print on the scroll when your head rolls across the Tower Green. But even then, even as your world is crumbling, there's still a part of Henry that wants to not do this. That part is small, smothered under bruised pride, but it exists. Maybe he thinks of the night you danced for him in scarlet velvet, of your laughter in the garden, of how you once kissed his cheek and whispered, "You look strong today, my lion." Those memories sting, and so he turns them into evidence of your deceit. He convinces himself you must have planned this, that you seduced him with false charm, that Culpeper was a plant, that your Howard relatives orchestrated the whole thing to infiltrate his court and corrupt his throne. And once Henry believes that version, there's no going back. He calls it treason, and with that word you're doomed. He has the council draw up charges, has the clerks prepare warrants, has the headsman notified, all without seeing your face, not once. Meanwhile you sit in your chamber, a queen without a crown, watching the candle melt and trying not to imagine the block. You ask your ladies if he sent word. You hope for a letter, a message, a second chance. But nothing comes, just guards, cold meals, the sound of footsteps echoing through the stone. The day Cranmer visits you after the first wave of accusations, you think for a moment that he's come to help. He speaks gently, with the same voice he uses at Mass. He listens as you talk about your past, about Lambeth, about Dereham. You try to explain, to make it all sound like innocence lost, not treason. But his face doesn't change. He thanks you, bows, leaves, and then you hear nothing for days, until the screaming starts. It's not yours, it's Rochford's. Her voice through the tower walls, shrill and broken, calling out to Anne Boleyn like she's still alive. "They've come again," she sobs. "They're here for my head this time." You press your hands over your ears, but it doesn't help. The sound lives inside you now, and when news reaches you that Culpeper has confessed to the letters, the meetings, everything but the consummation, you don't cry, you don't scream, you just sit very still and whisper, "He tried to protect me. Maybe it's a lie. Maybe it's a hope. Maybe it's just the last thing you have left." By the time the charges are read aloud to Parliament, you're no longer a queen. You're not even Catherine. You're that woman, a danger to the realm, a stain on the monarchy, a cautionary tale already taking shape while you're still breathing. And Henry? He celebrates Christmas that year with fireworks and feasts. Musicians play, wine flows. He laughs again. He laughs, because it's over. You've been erased, and in the twisted theatre of royal image, that's a victory. But here's the thing about erasure. It never really works. Not with people like you. People who burn too brightly to stay hidden. Because while Henry moves on, history doesn't. It leaves fingerprints, fragments, a note here, a portrait there, a name whispered by the wrong servant, at the right time, and slowly, the outline of you begins to reappear. Not perfect, but human. Not pure, but unforgettable. You've never seen the inside of the Tower of London quite like this. Before, it was just scenery. Grim stone behind your barge as you drifted past on the Thames. A place for other people, unfortunate people. A warning in the background. But now, it's not background anymore. It's your world. You're led through a narrow gate by armed men who say nothing, and the air is colder inside the walls like the stone has sucked the warmth from every moment that's passed here. You look up, half expecting to see someone watching from a window. You hope, irrationally, that it might be Henry, that maybe at the last second he'll see your face and remember you not as a mistake but as a person. No one's watching. You're escorted not to a cell, but to the same royal apartments where Anne Boleyn once stayed before her death. That irony isn't lost on you. You're in her rooms, your cousin's rooms, walking the same floors, breathing the same thick, damp air. Somewhere, in the cracks of the walls, maybe her voice still lingers. Maybe the tower keeps all your secrets and all your screams. The guards aren't cruel, they don't shout, they don't mock, but they don't look at you either. They've been trained for this, and they're tired of queens. Your name may still be Catherine, but to them you're already a ghost. The windows are high and narrow, barely more than slits, and even when you press your face against the cold stone, you can't see the sky. Just the mist. Just the courtyard. Just the scaffold, being quietly constructed plank by plank. You ask for writing materials. They bring you quills and a small pot of ink. You begin a letter to Henry. You try 3 times to start it. "My lord, your majesty, my husband." But the words slide sideways. Nothing sounds right anymore. What do you even say to a man who's ordered your death and refused to hear you speak? In the end, you write something simple, something that feels both too much and not enough. "I did not know how to be what you needed. I only knew how to be what I was." You don't sign it. You don't send it. You burn it over the tiny fire they allow you at night, and the smoke curls toward the ceiling like a last breath. Word trickles in from outside, not in full sentences, but in fragments from the lips of guards, whispers from servants bold enough to pity you. Culpepper confessed, they say. Lady Rochford is unwell. Derham, well, you already know, you can feel it. Like something in your chest has collapsed. And the king? He's hunting, eating, planning his next marriage. Someone brings you the details of Derham's death, hung, drawn, and quartered. His insides pulled from his body while he was still breathing. You don't eat that night. You don't speak for 2 days. Your own death is coming. You can feel it moving, toward you like a fog. But the tower doesn't tell you when. You just wait, like a note held at the end of a song waiting to resolve. There are mornings when you wake and think, this is it. And then the hours crawl by and no one comes, and there are nights when you dream of the axe, not just the sound of it, but the final moment when your breath ends, and you wake up gasping, your hands pressed to your throat. Then, at last, the warrant arrives. They don't read it aloud, they don't need to. You see it in their faces when they walk into your chamber, stiff, silent, avoiding eye contact. One of the officials places the parchment on the table, neatly, like it might shatter. You don't touch it. They tell you your execution will take place in the morning. It's February 12th, 1542. The sun is low. The light through the narrow window cuts across the floor like a blade. You don't cry. Not now. You've cried already. Quietly, for hours, for days. Now there's a strange stillness in your chest, like something's already given up and floated out of you. You're exhausted. You're 19. You ask for one thing, a block to practice on. At first they hesitate. One of the younger guards looks disturbed, but another nods, mutters something about dignity. And an hour later they bring you a block, rough and low, not even sanded. They leave you alone with it. You kneel, adjust, try again. You learn to position your neck just right so there's no chance of hesitation, no flinching. You don't want to make it harder for the executioner. You don't want it to hurt more than it has to. You whisper to yourself, over and over, I am not afraid, I am not afraid. You hope it'll be true eventually. That night you ask for a priest. You confess your sins, both real and imagined. You ask for forgiveness, not because you think it will change your fate, but because you need to speak. You need one person to hear your voice and remember that you were here, that you existed beyond scandal and shame. After the priest leaves, you sit by the window. You think of your childhood. You think of the girls at Lambeth, of music lessons and stifled giggles. You think of Francis Derham, of Thomas Culpepper, of the way they looked at you like you were something special. You wonder if it was love, or if you just wanted it to be. You don't sleep. Instead, you pray for silence, not mercy, not a miracle, just silence. You want your last moments to be still. When the sky begins to pale, you rise. Dress in crimson, the colour of martyrs. No jewels, no veil. You smooth your hair back and walk to the mirror. You're beautiful. You're 19. You're going to die. You place your hands over your heart and whisper, let it be quick. Let it be clean. And then you wait for the door to open. The door creaks open just after dawn. No fanfare, no official trumpet blast to announce your end. Just footsteps in the corridor and a low voice saying, it's time. You nod. You don't speak. There's nothing left to say. The gown you wear is warm, wool-lined and rich in colour, but you still feel the cold sink in, as if the tower itself has begun to reach for you. The guards who lead you are stiff with discomfort. You've seen these men before, back when you were queen, when they bowed and smiled and pretended you mattered. Now their eyes glance past you. Now their movements are all business. The walk is short but impossible. The tower grounds are quiet this morning, hushed in a way that doesn't feel respectful, just practical. The crowd is smaller than you imagined. A handful of officials, guards, servants and nobles pretending not to look directly at you. The king didn't want a spectacle. No grand public execution, no messy display. You are to disappear with the same silence that has followed you since your arrest. The scaffold waits at the centre of Tower Green, low, clean, newly built for you, straw scattered around its base. You try not to look at the block until the last possible moment, but it draws your eyes anyway. It always does. It's not large, just a plain slab of wood, slightly stained, the grain smoothed by many hands and many heads. Someone has placed a cloth over it, as if that will make it gentler. You climb the steps with a surprising steadiness. Maybe it's because you practiced. Maybe it's because you've spent so long anticipating this that the moment itself feels almost unreal. The wind curls around your legs. The sky above you is pale, colourless, like a washed-out painting. The crowd shifts but stays quiet. No jeering, no crying, just a collective stillness. A priest steps forward. He murmurs a prayer, but you don't follow along. You're not listening. Your thoughts are elsewhere, looping through every face you've ever loved or feared. Derham, Culpeper, Lady Rochford, the Duchess at Lambeth, your uncle, the king. Each one flashes across your mind like a candle flickering in a draught. Too fast, too dim, gone. The executioner is already in place. You glance at him. He's dressed in black, his face partially hidden beneath a hood, but his hands are steady. You wonder what he thinks of you, if he knows your name, if he's done this before, if he'll remember this moment tomorrow. He steps forward and kneels in front of you. "Forgive me, madam," he says. His voice is low, sincere. "I forgive you," you reply, and you do, with every ounce of grace left in you. You forgive him for being the end of your story. He's just another part of the machine that chewed through your life. You turn to the crowd, not for drama, just because you feel like you're supposed to. "I die a queen," you begin, your voice quiet but steady. "But I would rather die the wife of Culpeper." There are murmurs, soft gasps. Even now you can't resist speaking the truth, no matter how much it burns. You want them to remember that you were more than a mistake, that you loved, that you felt, and that your heart was never aligned with your crown. You kneel. The cloth over the block is cool against your skin. You place your hands in front of you, fingertips brushing the rough boards. You adjust your neck just as you practiced, making sure your position is clean. You close your eyes. For a moment you smell the damp wood, the faint iron tang of old blood, the lavender someone sprinkled on the straw in a futile attempt at ceremony. You take one last breath. The executioner raises his axe. He doesn't delay. The blade falls. It's quick, efficient, not like Derham's death, not like Rochford's madness. Yours is merciful in its way. One strike, and then silence. The crowd exhales all at once. Some avert their eyes. A few cross themselves. A man in the back turns and leaves without a word. They wrap your body in linen and place your head beside it, then carry you to the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. There, beneath the cold stone floor, they bury you without a marker. Just another body in a line of inconvenient women who once dared to sit too close to power. But the tower doesn't forget. Not really. Years from now, guides will tell tourists about the screaming ghost in the hallway near the Queen's house, about the girl in red who runs toward the chapel calling for mercy. Some say they've seen you through the windows at night, your hair loose, your gown billowing like fog. Some laugh. Others refuse to walk that corridor alone. The official records will list your name as Catherine Howard, 5th wife of Henry VIII. No titles, no epitaph, no plaque. But people will remember. Not all, not most, but enough. Enough to whisper, enough to write, enough to argue about your innocence, your guilt, your impossible choices. You, the teen queen, the laughing girl, the ghost. Your name will be spoken in bedrooms, classrooms, theatres. It will be written into scripts and stitched into costumes and softly recited beneath painted portraits that may or may not even be yours. And centuries later, when someone says your name, it won't be with scorn. It will be with wonder. Because even in death, especially in death, you refuse to vanish quietly. You burned, and burning things always leave light behind. The tower returns to quiet after you're gone, that same hollow, resigned silence that always follows an execution. A few servants sweep the scaffold clean, the straw is gathered, the block removed. It's like resetting a stage. One moment you're the centrepiece of an unfolding tragedy, the next, your scenery that's been packed away. But the air doesn't forget. It holds on to things, whispers, footsteps. The lingering scent of lavender that someone foolishly sprinkled in hopes of disguising death with perfume. No one talks about you that day, not openly, not over meals or in council. Henry has made it clear, your name is not to be spoken. You've been unpersoned, scrubbed from court memory. Some portraits are taken down, others are relabelled. The musicians who once played at your feasts are reassigned. The Queen's apartments are locked. Even the hound you favoured, an elegant white spaniel with sad eyes, is given to a distant lady-in-waiting with no interest in pets. Everything that was yours becomes someone else's or no one's at all. But of course that's not the end. It never is. Inside the tower, the guards continue to talk, especially when they think no one's listening. Some say you died brave. Some say you died too soon. One man swears you turned your head slightly at the last moment, and the blade landed on your neck at a slant. But that sounds suspiciously like embellishment. Another claims you muttered a prayer just before the axe fell, though no one else heard it. But the one story that takes root, the one people hold on to, is that you whispered, "I die a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Culpepper." No one writes it down at the time. It doesn't appear in any official account. But it spreads, like folklore does, like it needs to. Because even in death, you remain the question mark the court can't erase. And that single line, whether real or imagined, becomes your entire mythology. Outside the tower, across the city, people begin to talk again. At first, it's the servants and tradesmen, the ones who move quietly through the halls, who notice the shift. One baker who used to deliver bread to your kitchens swears the pastries never tasted the same after you were gone. A seamstress says her hands shook when tasked with unpicking your initials from the edge of a discarded gown. A page boy says he saw your ghost one night, still dressed in red, standing at the edge of the river. Then come the nobles. At first, they pretend they don't remember, that you were just a mistake, a phase. But behind closed doors, they repeat your name, slowly, cautiously. Some claim they always suspected you'd come to a bad end, which is rich considering how quickly they once sought your favour. A few mourn you quietly, not with flowers or prayers, but with long silences and lowered eyes when someone mentions February. But the king? He does what kings do. He moves on. In March, he reopens the Queen's wing. Catherine Parr is summoned to court soon after. She is kind, intelligent, proper, everything you weren't. And she survives, largely because she learns from your fall. She keeps her thoughts guarded, her letters discreet. She steps carefully around Henry's moods, speaks when spoken to, and spends most of her energy tending to his health. She's more nurse than wife, and while she doesn't bring joy to the court in the way you once did, she brings calm. That's what Henry needs now, not a blaze, a blanket. He never speaks of you again, not even once, but he doesn't forget. Not really. There's a story, a small one, tucked into an old court diary, that in his final months, when Henry was bloated and bedridden and halfway between raving and rotting, he had all his wives' portraits brought into the room, just to look at. Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Catherine Parr, even Anne of Cleves, whom he now considered a friend. But there was one painting he kept beside the bed, and no one could quite agree on who it was. The face was young, the smile soft, the artist anonymous. Some said it was you. No one dared ask. In the years after his death, your name returns to the record, tentatively at first. A mention in a chronicle here, a line in a bishop's journal there. Nothing flattering, but nothing forgotten, and once something is remembered, it's free to evolve. Soon, you become a character, not in history books, those take longer, but in gossip and theatre. Small companies begin performing The Queen's Secret, a dramatic retelling of your downfall with powdered wigs, too much weeping, and inaccurate accents. You're portrayed as either a seductress or an angel, depending on the political mood. The real you gets lost somewhere between curtain calls, and yet, in each version, they always include that final line. I would rather die the wife of Culpepper. It doesn't matter whether you said it. It's yours now. Generations pass, and your story starts to slip into the cultural bloodstream. Women invoke your name when speaking about betrayal. Poets use your image to symbolize innocence devoured. Painters try to capture your likeness, though no one's quite sure what you looked like. Was your hair truly red? Was your face more soft than sharp? Were your eyes green or hazel? They guess. They romanticize. They paint you over and over again until your face belongs more to fantasy than memory. And somewhere along the way, the tragedy changes shape. You're no longer just the queen who died for loving the wrong man. You become the girl who tried to live in a world that demanded she stand still. who tried to feel joy when everything around her insisted she be silent, who paid the ultimate price for being simply too much for the time she lived in. And though your body is gone, buried beneath the stone of the Tower Chapel, anonymous and unmarked, your story has never stopped moving. It winds its way through halls, through books, through generations. It refuses to stay still. Some ghosts haunt out of anger, others out of regret. But you haunt because you were unfinished, because something in your story still feels close to the skin, and because somewhere, in some quiet corridor, your footsteps are still echoing. Not toward the scaffold, but away from it. Your death may have been quick, but your silence afterward is anything but. It spreads like a stain, slow at first, then uncontainable. Henry has always treated grief like a performance, but this time the curtain doesn't rise. There's no memorial for you, no eulogy, no solemn moment of reflection. You're not spoken of in court unless absolutely necessary, and even then you're referred to vaguely, like an awkward pause in the middle of a sentence. That affair, they might say, or the matter of the former queen. Not a person, not Catherine. The king retreats deeper into himself. More meat, more drink, more advisers with soothing lies. His leg ulcer worsens, his temper turns fouler, and his moods swing like a drawbridge in a gale. Catherine Parr, ever dutiful, walks on eggshells as she nurses him through his rage and decline. She's not the kind of queen who will inspire ghost stories or ballads. That's why she survives. She's a footnote, efficient, self-contained, impossible to love or hate too deeply. And yet, even in this engineered forgetting, your presence refuses to vanish. That's the thing about emotional truths. They outlive official records. One of your former chambermaids is seen years later, sitting in a market stall with a worn rosary and a tight-lipped smile. A girl in service at Windsor swears she found a locket in an old chest, its clasp broken, the inside holding a wisp of reddish gold hair. No one can prove it was yours. No one needs to. In pubs and parlours, your story is passed from mouth to mouth. The version depends on who's telling it. Sometimes you're the foolish girl who thought she could play queen and got burned. Sometimes you're the seductress who used her smile like a blade. And sometimes, just sometimes, you're remembered as the girl who never got a choice, the one who fell in love maybe for the first time and paid for it with her life. But you're more than folklore. You're a mirror, especially to the women who come after you. Consider Elizabeth I, your cousin, your ghost-wrapped legacy in human form. She would have been just 8 or 9 years old when you were executed. Old enough to know, if not all the details, then certainly the mood. The sudden hush in the corridors, the way grown-ups shifted nervously at the sound of your name, the way her own mother, Anne Boleyn, had also lost her head not so many years before. Elizabeth grows up with a spine made of steel and secrets. She watches, she listens, and when she comes to power, she refuses to marry, refuses to give any man the authority to undo her. People scoff. They call her cold, a virgin, a tyrant in pearls. But beneath her icy exterior is a girl who learned too well what happens to queens who try to be warm. She builds a wall around herself, brick by brick, with your blood and her mother's as mortar. You were her warning, her ghost, her roadmap. You died young so she could rule old. Meanwhile, historians start doing what historians always do. Argue. For decades, no, centuries, they circle your name like vultures with pocket watches pecking at the facts. Was it true love or teenage infatuation? Were you manipulated by the Howards? Did you seduce the king, or did he corner you? Did you know what you were doing when you summoned Culpeper? And, most controversially, did you deserve to die for it? That last question never really gets an answer, mostly because it shouldn't need one. In the 1800s, during the golden age of historical fiction, your story gets dusted off and romanticised into something almost operatic. They paint you with roses in your hair, a letter clutched to your chest, your eyes wide and filled with doomed hope. Novelists can't resist you. They wrap your tragedy in silk and lace, fill your head with longing, and let the axe fall with artistic timing. You become the Victorian ideal of ruined innocence, and just like that, you're fashionable again. You go from scandal to sympathy, from a name to a face, from that foolish queen to a literary muse. Women begin to write about you. First poems, then essays, then actual historical studies. They pull apart the propaganda and try to see you clearly, beneath all the layers of revision. It's not easy. The Tudor court was a master of spin, and your story was polished to suit the king's version of events. But the truth leaks out anyway. It always does. They begin to question the narrative, to notice how your confession was written in someone else's hand, how your words were filtered through men who needed to protect their own heads, how you weren't given a trial, not a real one, and how most of your evidence came from people under torture or threat. It starts to look less like justice and more like a cover-up, and that changes everything. By the early 20th century, you begin to appear in academic works not just as a casualty, but as a case study. A queen with a question mark, a teenager in an adult world, a warning about what happens when systems punish girls for daring to be human. Your name returns to schoolrooms, this time not as a scandal, but as a topic of discussion. Teachers stand at blackboards and say, "Let's talk about Catherine Howard. What would you have done in her place?" Students raise hands. Some say you should have kept quiet. Others say you never had a chance. One says, "I think she was just trying to live." That one's closest. And the tower. Still haunted. Not just in the ghost tour way, though, yes, you're a hit there. People claim to see you most often near the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. A red blur, a sound like slippers running on stone, a whisper in the dark. But the real haunting is quieter. It's in the way your name clings to the walls, to the windows, to the iron bars polished smooth by time and touch. You may be gone, but they still listen for you. Because deep down, even centuries later, they know what was taken from you, and they're still not sure how to forgive themselves. Let's linger for a moment in those final thoughts, the ones that never made it onto parchment. Because on the morning you were led to the scaffold, you weren't just thinking about death, you were thinking about before, about every second that passed through your life like water through fingers, about the things you saw, the things you never got to say, and the things you thought would matter more than they did. And there, in that sliver of time between breath and blade, everything sharpened. You remembered the smell of the river on cold mornings, the heavy perfume clinging to the court after a masque, the warmth of Culpepper's palm brushing yours, a quiet and electric moment that somehow meant more than all the king's jewelled gifts combined. You thought about laughter, the real kind, not the polished version you wore like a mask, the kind that came out of you without permission. And maybe you remembered your mother's face, though it's fuzzy now, even in memory. A figure, a voice, a shadow of something kinder. No one gets to know what your last conscious thought truly was. That was yours alone. The historians can guess, the writers can invent, but only you had that final moment of self, undiluted and unperformed. And maybe it was full of regret, or maybe, just maybe, it was defiance. Maybe the part of you that learned to survive in a world of predators and power stood up in those final seconds and said, "You do not get to define me." Because that's the thing about death. It ends your life, but it doesn't get the last word. History, for better or worse, will fight over that. And fight it has. In the centuries that followed, your name became a battleground. Not just for historians, but for women trying to claw back space in stories that so often belong to men. You became a symbol, not of failure, but of fragility mistreated. A girl who wasn't given protection, only judgment. A figure picked apart by scholars who wanted to know whether you were stupid or seductive, and only recently started asking whether you were safe. Modern scholarship doesn't see you the same way. It sees a teenager. One caught between monstrous power structures and a cultural obsession with purity and submission. Feminist historians dissect your tale with care, pointing out that the language used against you, words like wanton, unchaste, impure, were weaponized against girls just like you for centuries. And they ask the real question at the heart of your story. How do you survive when every path is a trap? You were expected to be desirable but untouched, charismatic but obedient, educated enough to impress but not enough to challenge, and above all you were expected to forget yourself. You failed at that part, thank God. Because even in the mess of your story, in the betrayal and the poor decisions and the disaster that followed, you never stopped being real. And real women, real people, are rarely tidy. Your letters prove it. Desperate, dreamy, dramatic things full of hope and fear, and the kind of trembling honesty no court could sanitize. You weren't writing like a queen. You were writing like a girl who wanted something more than survival. You wanted connection. In your quietest moments, you probably imagined a future that had nothing to do with thrones or titles. Maybe a cottage somewhere, a garden, a man who loved you without conditions, maybe children, maybe music, maybe the freedom to laugh too loud and kiss someone just because you wanted to. And even if that dream was foolish, especially in Tudor England, foolishness should never be a death sentence, yet it was. You weren't just executed for loving the wrong man. You were executed because you reminded the court of how vulnerable it really was. A teenage girl with secrets became a threat to the most powerful man in England. Not because you held power, but because you reminded him that he could be fooled, that his image could be cracked, that his crown didn't protect him from humiliation. And in a monarchy built entirely on appearance, nothing is more dangerous than that. That's why they had to erase you, not just to punish you, but to protect the illusion. And to a large degree they succeeded. Your name was blackened, your memory twisted. You were called promiscuous, untrustworthy, dangerous. You were made into a cautionary tale. Don't be a Catherine Howard, the saying went, whispered from mother to daughter. But eventually those whispers began to shift, because the longer people stared at your story, the more they began to ask, why was she left so unguarded? Why was she given power with no guidance? Why were her mistakes fatal while others were forgiven? And the most painful question of all, why does this feel so familiar? Because even now, in the supposed age of progress, girls are still asked to walk tightropes, still told to be pleasing but pure, still shamed for wanting and punished for not wanting enough, still blamed for the consequences of systems that were never designed to protect them. And so you've become something else entirely. Not just a historical footnote, not just a victim, but a lens, a way of seeing the world more clearly, of understanding how power turns affection into a weapon, how silence is enforced not by chains but by shame, and how the people who suffer most are usually the ones who are never allowed to speak for themselves. But now they speak for you. Historians, writers, poets, even playwrights who put you on stage in pop musicals, rhinestoned and singing in harmonies, letting you rewrite the ending. You're given the mic, you get your solo, you sing not as a ghost, but as a girl who mattered, who lived, who loved, who lost, and the audience cheers, because deep down they recognize you. They know the pressure of pretending, the ache of wanting, the fear of being punished for simply existing too brightly. And so your story becomes not just a tragedy, but a revolution in miniature, one that started with a letter and ended in a roar. After the blade fell, the court drew a long, breathless pause and then exhaled like nothing had happened. That's the rhythm of power in Tudor England. Purge, pause, pretend. You die on a Tuesday morning and by Thursday the tapestries in your apartments have been replaced. The silks packed up. The official records revised. Your initials scrubbed from silverware. Your letters burned in kitchen fires as if ash could unwrite desire. You disappear not just from palace walls but from memory, or so they think. Because for all their attempts to turn you into a footnote, you linger in the corners where the real stories tend to live. Behind closed doors, the court resumes its rituals. Henry hosts dinners, though they're more subdued now. Fewer jokes, more wine. He slumps in his chair, his leg an open wound, his mood slipping steadily from bluster to bitterness. His once grand figure has become grotesque, swollen with sickness and spite, and those close to him know better than to mention your name. But he thinks of you. Oh, he thinks of you. There's a document from a court physician, not official, just a note tucked between records, that mentions a strange moment weeks after your death. The king, feverish and raving, called for the little one with laughing eyes. He sat upright in bed, stared at the wall and shouted, "She lied to me! She made me feel young again!" The physician wrote that down, and then crossed it out. Because a king's grief, like a king's rage, must follow the script, and yours didn't. Meanwhile, the court circles like vultures over what you left behind. Not your things, those were claimed or discarded within hours, but the meaning of you. Every noble family with a daughter of marrying age saw your death as both a caution and an opportunity. The Howards fell from grace hard and fast. They were untouchable while you reigned. Now they're toxic, stripped of power, several imprisoned, a few executed. Others vanish quietly, fleeing into smaller estates and lower ambitions. And yet, in some twisted way, your downfall reaffirms the monarchy's power. Henry's fifth wife, young, beautiful and dead by decree, becomes an unspoken example. This is what happens when you misstep. It doesn't need to be said aloud. The palace walls say it for you. The silence becomes policy. Catherine Parr enters the story like a deep breath after screaming. She's older, widowed twice, a lover of books and God. Not glamorous, not bold, but stable. She knows how to listen, when to flatter, how to read a room. She understands that being queen is less about ruling and more about surviving the person who does. She keeps her head. But not because she's better, because she's careful, and because of you. Yes, because of you. In her letters, preserved, thank heaven, she reflects on queenship with a kind of quiet wisdom. She never names you directly, but she writes of those who came before, whose light burned too brightly and were extinguished too soon. That line stays with readers for centuries, because it says what the court won't, that you were a fire and they couldn't stand the heat. Let's talk about legacy. Not the grand statues or portraits kind, those were denied to you, but the small sharp traces you left behind. One of your old hair combs surfaces in an estate sale in the early 1700s. It's labelled simply, "From a Queen Who Was Lost." Another item, a small prayer book, was passed through generations of a lesser noble family, claimed to have been smuggled from the Tower by a sympathetic maid. Its pages are marked with faint impressions of fingernails pressed into the margins. People say it was yours, historians argue, but the myth clings. Then there are the letters, the ones you wrote to Culpeper. They are rare, incomplete, fragments of emotion scrawled in a hand both practised and desperate. "I long to see you," one begins. Another ends with, "Yours as long as life endures." Romantic, foolish, brave. They survive not because they were kept safe, but because they were used as evidence against you. Treasonous artifacts, paper daggers, and yet now, centuries later, they're preserved under glass in museums. Touched only by gloved hands, the same words that once condemned you now bring people to tears. Tourists stand in front of those letters and whisper things like, "She was so young," or "She sounds like she really loved him," or simply, "This wasn't fair." Because finally, they're allowed to see you not as a criminal, but as a girl, and that in itself is a revolution. Art follows. Painters return to your face, imagined or reconstructed, and try to capture something essential. Your vulnerability, your fire, your youth. You're often depicted in red, a nod to the colour of your final gown, sometimes with a single tear, sometimes with a look of defiance, sometimes simply with your eyes turned towards something no one else can see. You appear in literature too, first as a tragic heroine, then as a symbol of resistance, then as a figure of empathy, a teenage girl swallowed by a system too rigid to bend. By the 21st century, you've been played by a dozen actresses, sung by pop stars in corsets, and rewritten in stories that finally try to ask the harder questions. Not, was she guilty, but why was she left so alone? Not did she love him, but what choices did she have? Because in the end, that's what your story forces people to confront. The architecture of blame, the weight of expectation, the violence of performance, and the cost of being someone too bright in a world too dark. You were not the first woman to be punished for love. You were not the last. But you were one of the few who managed to turn punishment into presence, into memory, into something that won't stay buried. Your name, once erased, now echoes. And every time someone tells your story, it gets louder. There's a strange kind of legacy that clings to queens who don't get to grow old. The ones who die young, usually violently, usually quietly. They don't become statues. They become questions, unfinished thoughts, a pause mid-sentence. That's where you live now, Catherine, between what was and what might have been. Not in the royal lineage or court calendars, but in the gaps of history, the soft spots, the part where people ask, but what if she had lived? Because the truth is, no one planned for your survival. When they put the crown on your head, it wasn't because they saw a future in you. It was because you fit a moment. Young, charming, untouched, allegedly. You were the king's fifth attempt at hope. Not a partner, not an advisor, a cure, a symbol. A story he wanted to tell about himself, that he could still inspire love, that he could still summon spring from winter. But the story collapsed the moment you stepped off script, and once you fall out of the story, in Henry's court, you fall fast. Still, the people closest to you, your servants, the ones who saw you when the crown was off when you weren't performing, remember you. Not as a queen, but as a girl. Some say you sang to yourself when you thought no one was listening. Others remember the way you pressed flowers into the pages of your prayer book. You had favourite scents: clove, rosemary, lemon balm. You liked red the most. Not the deep maroon of court gowns, but vibrant, living red. The kind that stands out in a room. The kind that says, I am here. And now that you're gone, the rooms feel colder. You're not the only Howard who paid for your downfall. Your family, once proud and loud and deeply entrenched in Tudor politics, falls spectacularly. Your uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, survives, but only barely. He renounces you quickly, a man trying to cut off the infected limb before rot sets in. Others aren't so lucky. Thomas Howard, your cousin, is imprisoned. Several ladies from your household are interrogated, tortured, ruined. And Lady Rochford, Jane Boleyn, she meets the block soon after you. That part of the story feels like an echo. Jane, who once helped destroy Anne Boleyn, ends up haunted by her decisions. By the time your scandal erupts, she's a husk of herself. She arranges your secret meetings with Culpeper, and later claims she only did it because she feared for her sanity. Whether she was truly mad or just playing the part to save her neck is a debate no one's ever settled. But in the end, Parliament changes the law to execute her anyway. Madness is no longer protection. She dies in the same spot you did, a few days later. Some say she went quietly. Others say she screamed for Anne as the axe came down. No matter the details, one thing is clear. Your downfall didn't just end your life. It sent tremors through everyone near you. A domino collapse of ambition and shame. You were the spark, but the fire spread. And yet, the farther away the court moves from your death, the more blurred the line becomes between punishment and spectacle. People stop talking about guilt and start whispering about romance, about tragedy, about how you died so beautifully, about how you carried yourself with grace. The narrative begins to soften, and in the softening, your story starts to change. Not in the records, they stay brutal, cold, clinical. They refer to you only as the late Queen, as a figure, a problem solved. But in the minds of the people, you become something else entirely, a legend. Centuries pass and your image, whatever that even was, starts showing up in odd places. A brooch at auction is said to be yours. A mirror in an antique shop is rumoured to reflect your face, but only under candlelight. A stretch of corridor in the tower is called Catherine's Walk, and children dare each other to run through it in silence, just to see if your ghost will follow. Sometimes that's all a woman gets. Superstition, echoes. But in your case, those echoes are louder than most. There's a strange tale passed down by generations of tower wardens. They say that once, long after midnight, a young guard stood post outside the chapel and heard footsteps, soft, slippered, fast. When he turned, he saw a figure running. Pale gown, red hair, no face, just a blur. It vanished before he could speak. The next morning he turned in his resignation. He didn't return for his final paycheck, but what lingers longer than ghosts are questions. And yours is eternal. What would have happened if Henry had forgiven you? If Culpeper had stayed away? If someone, anyone, had cared enough to guide you rather than use you? If you'd been allowed to grow up? No one really wants to say it aloud, but we all know it. You were a child with a crown, and in the ruthless machine of Tudor power, that was never going to end well. But your memory persists, not because it was preserved, but because it refused to stay buried. It leaked out in the corners of documents, in the pauses between other people's stories, in the regret no one dared name. You weren't meant to be remembered. You were meant to be an error, a failed experiment. But people remember anyway. In England's long, tangled royal history, there are queens who left policy and children and empires behind. And then there are queens like you, the ones who left feeling. Because while the kings left wars and borders, you left a question mark in 1,000 hearts. You left wonder. You left warning. And most of all, you left a whisper that keeps repeating. louder with every century. She never had a chance. The tower settles back into its rhythm after your execution, as it always does, as it has for centuries. People move on, or at least they act like they do. The guards change shifts, the cooks return to their kitchens, the council chambers echo with new names and new whispers. But your name doesn't disappear. Not really. It just shifts into another layer of the place, woven into its stone, passed between breaths. You're not the official story. You're the one told quietly after dark when the torches are low and someone asks, "Do you know about Catherine Howard?" Because there's something about your death that doesn't sit right, even now, even back then. Anne Boleyn died a queen with enemies, real and imagined. Her execution came with politics and ambition, court factions ripping each other to shreds. But you were executed for being too young, too foolish, too in love, too loud, too alive. No grand conspiracy, no treasonous plot. Just a girl who got too close to the flame and was blamed when it burned her. The more people look back, the more obvious that becomes. And still, no monument. No statue in Westminster Abbey. No inscription in gold. But you have something rarer. You've become a kind of living ghost in English culture. Not in the literal sense, though yes, there are plenty who claim to have seen you, but in memory, in language, in feeling. A spectral symbol of everything that happens when the world punishes a woman for being herself. It's ironic, isn't it? They tried so hard to forget you, Henry especially. The man who once called you his rose without a thorn turned his back the second your petals weren't pristine. But you live on, not in his shadow, but in his wake. While he rotted, bloated and bitter, you became legend. There's even a small but persistent group of historians, obsessed and endearing, who dedicate their careers to you. They write papers with titles like Catherine Howard, Misunderstood Queen, or Teenage Porn, and Letters from the Scaffold, re-examining the emotional world of Henry VIII's fifth wife. They sift through every scrap of record, every questionable portrait, every rumour that survived. Some get it wrong, many get it close, but all of them agree on one thing. You were never given a fair chance. Some write sympathetically, casting you as a tragic victim of a cruel, patriarchal world. Others lean into the complexity. How maybe you did know what you were doing. How maybe you played a dangerous game and simply lost. And then there are the romantics. The ones who write about Culpeper like he was your Romeo, who frame your downfall as a love story rather than a political one. But love story or not, you're still dead by 19. That part never changes. And yet, you remain a cultural presence. On stage, you sing. On screen, you cry. In novels, you're painted in candlelight, staring out a frostbitten window as history closes in. Some authors give you happy endings, alternate realities where you and Culpeper escape, where Henry dies before he can destroy you, where you live long enough to become wise. It's wish fulfillment, but no one's complaining. Because there's something deeply satisfying about imagining a world where you're allowed to finish your story. One show turns you into a pop star, literally. You stand on a stage with 5 other wives, all in glitter and heels, rewriting the script. You get your solo. You sing not as a cautionary tale, but as someone finally speaking for herself. You say, "Don't paint me as a victim or a villain. I was here, I was real, I wanted something more." And the crowd roars because they feel it too. That's the magic of legacy, the way it evolves, the way it can slip out of a monarch's grasp and into the hands of the people who actually care. You weren't supposed to be remembered with affection or empathy. You were supposed to be discarded, a failed queen, forgotten after a season. But history is messier than that. It has a long memory and a stubborn streak. Even the tower, for all its coldness, begins to lean into your story. Tour guides give your name special weight. Catherine Howard, they say, pausing just a beat longer than usual. They tell the tale with flourishes. How you ran down the corridor screaming for mercy. How your ghost appears in white or red, depending on the night. Some say it's all theatre. Others swear they've heard you, seen you, felt you. And whether it's real or not, it matters. Because when people remember you, even through folklore, even through fiction, they're saying, this woman lived. This woman mattered. And you did. Even the royal family, centuries later, quietly acknowledges you in subtle ways. A commemorative exhibit at Hampton Court features your story. They include the love letters, the rough sketch of your signature, the gown styled in your era's fashion. No apologies are issued, but no attempt is made to hide you either. You're no longer a secret, just a scar. And scars, while not beautiful, are proof of survival, even if it's only the survival of truth. It's strange, isn't it? To have your life boiled down to a handful of moments, your flirtations, your downfall, your final words. But maybe those pieces are enough. Maybe they're more than enough. Because in every retelling someone sees you a little more clearly. Not the caricature, not the doomed queen, not the body on the scaffold, just you. The girl who laughed too loudly, who loved too freely, who was expected to know better in a world that never taught her how. And that's the thing about stories. They outlive their authors. Henry's version of you died with him. But yours? Yours is still unfolding, still whispered, still sung. A chorus of empathy that grows louder with each generation. You aren't just remembered, you're felt. Every old palace has a room they don't quite talk about. Not forbidden exactly, just avoided. Politely, cautiously, like an old wound that's never quite healed. At Hampton Court it's the haunted corridor, the one just outside the Chapel Royal. They call it the Haunted Gallery, and tourists walk down it slowly, whispering to each other, cameras already raised, hoping to catch the faint outline of something, or someone, that shouldn't be there. It's your hallway, Catherine. The story they tell, whether or not it's true, goes like this. On the day you were arrested, you broke free from your guards and ran, barefoot, dishevelled, frantic. You sprinted down that corridor past the staring courtiers straight toward the chapel where Henry was at prayer. You banged on the doors, shrieking for him to forgive you, to see you, to let you explain. But the guards caught you before you could reach him, dragged you back, your screams echoing through the stone, bouncing off the stained glass. They say it was the last time you truly fought for your life. No one knows for certain if it happened like that. Some say it's romantic nonsense. Others swear it's documented in dispatches lost to time. But the ghost story, that's real enough. People still report seeing you there. Tourists swear they've heard your footsteps running fast and light. A guide once claimed they saw your shadow dart past the chapel doors in the dead of winter when no one else was in the building. And the reports are always the same, a blur of red, a flicker of fabric, a face contorted in desperation, the sound of something, someone, crying for mercy that will never come. You're not the only spirit in the tower or the palace, but you're the most restless. Anne Boleyn is solemn, they say, stoic, resigned. Jane Grey is quiet. Elizabeth I is too proud to haunt at all. But you're still moving, still running, still trying to be heard. Even the skeptics feel it. There's something about that hallway, how the light falls just wrong, how the air stays colder there than anywhere else in the building. Some say it's a draft, others something older. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, it doesn't really matter. The stories persist. The feelings persist. You've become part of the building, not in stone or plaster, but in atmosphere. You are woven into the very fabric of the place you once danced in. The walls remember you, even if the king tried not to. And the tourists? They remember too. They come to the Tower and Hampton Court expecting history. Armour, thrones, crowns. But they leave talking about you. The young queen who begged for mercy. The girl in red who ran toward a chapel and never came back out. They take your story home with them, tucked into brochures and late-night conversations. She was so young, they say. I didn't know. I wonder if she really haunts it. The thing is, you do. Whether by spirit or story, you're still walking that corridor, still reaching out. Not for Henry, he's long gone, but for us, for anyone who'll listen, and people are finally listening. Writers find you irresistible. You're everything a good story needs. A rise, a fall, a tragedy wrapped in silk. You're complex in a way few women in your time were allowed to be. A teenage queen with secrets, desires, and a voice no one wanted to hear until it was too late. You're fiction ready. History's most unfinished draft. Modern retellings start painting you in richer colour. Not just the doomed beauty, but the girl who never got to grow up. The survivor who didn't survive. You're reimagined as clever, angry, heartbroken, brave. Sometimes all at once. People stop asking whether you deserved what happened and start asking why it happened at all. And in that shift you gain something Henry never intended you to have. your humanity. You're not a caricature anymore. You're not just beheaded wife number 5. You're a person. One people recognise in themselves. Your laughter, your mistakes, your hope. Because your life, and the loss of it, still rings true. Still touches something raw. Especially for women who see in you the constant double standard, the way charm becomes manipulation, how desire becomes crime, how being seen becomes being blamed. That's why your ghost matters. Because it isn't about a floating figure in a hallway, it's about the echoes, the weight, the silence after the story ends too soon. Ghosts don't always need to show up to haunt a place. Sometimes all they need is for someone to remember. And people do, in classroom discussions, in museum tours, in late-night YouTube binges titled The Tragic Life of Catherine Howard. There's an intimacy to the way people talk about you now, like you were a friend they lost too early. They debate whether you and Culpepper were truly in love. They analyse your letters for clues. They defend you in TikTok comments. It's messy, it's passionate, it's human, which is exactly what you were. Not a lesson, not a warning, not a spirit stuck between walls. Just a girl who loved, who hoped, who broke the rules of a world that was never made for you, and who still, centuries later, won't stay silent. They tried to erase you, but they couldn't. They tried to bury you, but the story wouldn't stay underground. They built a scaffold, but it only gave your name altitude. Now you don't walk the haunted gallery alone. You walk with everyone who ever tried to scream and wasn't heard, and together your footsteps echo louder than ever. By now, the debate around your life has turned academic, emotional, theatrical, and digital. You've become a topic in classrooms, a lyric in songs, a Pinterest board of period dresses, a stream of fan-casted dream actresses who might play you next. You've been dissected by professors and reenacted on stage. Some view you through feminist theory, others through romantic nostalgia, and some still, hilariously, as the worst of Henry's wives, as if there were ever a contest worth entering. But no matter how they approach you, one fact becomes harder to deny with every retelling. Catherine Howard was never just a queen who made bad choices. Catherine Howard was a girl made dangerous by the expectations placed on her, then destroyed when she failed to meet them. You represent the tension at the heart of Tudor politics, where sex, power and image collide with deadly results. On one side is Henry VIII, aging, obese, increasingly paranoid, obsessed with his legacy. On the other is you, vibrant, impulsive, inexperienced and beautiful. You were never meant to be an equal. You were meant to be an ornament, a symbol of the king's continued virility, a fresh start, a narrative reset. And when you refused to stay within that role, when you laughed too much, when you looked at the wrong man, when your past caught up with you, Henry flipped the script. Again, turned you from treasure to traitor, from rose to rot. It's still debated whether you actually slept with Culpepper after marrying the king. The letters were emotional, yes, they were risky, but they weren't explicit. They don't confess, they imply. But implication was enough in Henry's court, especially when a man's pride was wounded, especially when your existence was a mirror he couldn't bear to look into anymore. And that's what's always been missing from the discussion. How much of this was ever really about you? Not much. You were the subject, yes, but the story was always about Henry, about preserving his power, about managing his image. When you made him feel desired, you were a miracle. When you made him feel foolish, you were a liability. And that is the real tragedy. Not just that you died so young, but that you died for someone else's reputation. Let's talk about one of the more bizarre aspects of your case, the so-called pre-contract with Francis Derham. This was a legally murky issue in Tudor law. If you had previously pledged yourself to marry Derham, even informally, then your marriage to Henry might have been invalid, which, ironically, would have made you not guilty of adultery because in the Church's eyes, you wouldn't have been married to Henry at all. But that legal knot never mattered. They weren't looking for nuance, they were looking for a clean cut, and they got it. Because as soon as a queen is seen as damaged goods in Tudor England, she's as good as dead. And that's what makes modern scholars pause. Because when they look closely at the evidence, what you said, what others claimed, what could never quite be proven, they see not a manipulative temptress, but a teenager caught in a net. A girl whose mistakes were magnified until they filled the sky. A girl who was not protected, not believed, and ultimately not spared. In recent years, there's been a shift in how we frame your story. Not just a shift in language, but in tone. More and more, you are spoken of with empathy. Teachers pause before telling your story, reminding students how young you really were. Documentaries linger longer on your childhood, your household in Lambeth, your lack of guidance. You're no longer just the one who was beheaded for cheating. You're Catherine Howard. Complex, tragic, deserving of more than a footnote. And in that shift, something radical happens. You become a symbol of survival. Not literal, of course, but spiritual. An emblem for every girl who's ever been blamed for the way she smiles. For every woman punished more harshly for her mistakes than the men who made them with her. You're not an icon of perfection. You're an icon of injustice. And that somehow is more powerful. Because people don't just pity you now. They connect with you. They see you. It's strange how history can do that. How the past bends, not to erase itself, but to reveal what it missed the first time. Your story is no longer just a page in a king's biography. It's its own narrative. It has been reclaimed, expanded, reinterpreted, and it continues to evolve. Catherine Howard becomes more than the fifth wife. She becomes a question we ask ourselves again and again. How many times have we let someone like her fall? And the tower, in its own grim way, seems to remember. The stones are soaked in memory, and yours is perhaps the most persistent. Even if you don't believe in ghosts, even if you think all the tales of your running feet and desperate screams are just folklore, well, folklore is a kind of truth too. It's the truth people need to believe, even when the facts fade. And people do believe. They come to the tower not just for the armour and the royal jewels, but for the haunting, for the idea that someone like you still lingers, still walks, still wants to be heard. And maybe that's true. Maybe it's you they feel when the lights flicker in the chapel. Maybe it's you when a tour guide forgets a line and suddenly feels watched. Maybe it's you in the moment a girl standing in front of your name etched into a pamphlet realises I've felt like her. And in that moment your story breathes again, not with screams, not with running feet, but with recognition. You were never allowed to finish your story, but we keep telling it, and the more we do, the more it belongs to you again. By now, you've become the measuring stick, the whispered comparison for every other woman who came dangerously close to Henry's wrath. At least she wasn't Catherine Howard, people say, almost like a nervous joke. At least she kept her head. But the truth is, none of them really escaped unscarred. Not Anne Boleyn, not Jane Seymour, not even the seemingly untouchable Catherine Parr. Your story may have ended at 19, but it casts a longer shadow than most of your fellow queens could have imagined, and when people line up the 6 wives like a grim little rhyme, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived, you're often lumped together with Anne. But the reality, your stories couldn't be more different. Anne Boleyn was lightning in a bottle, sharp-tongued, politically savvy, impossible to ignore. She played the long game, fought her way up from lady-in-waiting to queen, and helped trigger the English Reformation in the process. Anne went to the scaffold swinging, more lioness than lamb. But you were never allowed to play the game. You were dropped into it, already tangled in a net of noble ambitions and court expectations, with no strategy, no training, and no margin for error. Jane Seymour, the one who gave Henry a son and then conveniently died before she could fall from grace, is often called the favourite. He buried her with him, after all. But it's easier to cherish someone who didn't live long enough to disappoint you. Jane was queen for barely a year, and never challenged Henry's ego. Her legacy is safe because it's short. Anne of Cleves, the lucky one as people now call her, survived her brief, awkward marriage with a handsome annulment settlement and a charming second act. She called herself the king's sister, and lived out her days in comfort, distant from the court's lethal chessboard. She's the exception, not the rule, the outlier who escaped because Henry never truly desired her. Then there's Catherine Parr, the 6th wife, the survivor. She nursed him, tended to him, appeased him. She also came dangerously close to execution for her Protestant beliefs, but pulled back just in time. She outlived Henry and finally married for love. Thomas Seymour, ironically, Jane's brother. Of course, that marriage was its own disaster, but at least it was hers to choose. Which leaves you, Catherine Howard, forever the teen queen, the youngest, the most tragic, the one who loved wrong and died for it. But when you line the stories up, a strange pattern emerges. The more a woman loved, the more she lost. Anne Boleyn loved a king and was accused of loving too many. Jane Seymour loved duty and died in childbirth. Catherine of Aragon loved Henry longer than anyone, and he threw her away. You dared to love someone other than the king, and that's what they couldn't forgive. It's not that you made mistakes. Everyone did. The difference was yours came wrapped in youth and beauty, and people, especially powerful men, hate when beauty slips out of their control. You became a symbol not of betrayal, but of possibility. You reminded everyone that even a queen might have her own desires, that a crown wasn't a muzzle, and that perhaps worst of all, you weren't afraid to be loved genuinely, not as a reward, not as a title, but for who you were, with all your flaws and fire. That's what terrified them. Because for all his bluster, Henry didn't want a real woman. He wanted a mirror, someone who would reflect his strength, his virility, his delusions. And when you stopped doing that, when your smile turned to someone else, when your loyalty wavered, he shattered the mirror. Not because it lied, but because it told the truth. Your fellow queens had their own stories, yes, but you were the moment the whole court collectively realised, if this could happen to her, it could happen to any of us. And it did. In the years that followed, your execution became more than a scandal. It became a warning etched into every conversation behind silk sleeves and lowered voices. Daughters were taught to be quiet. Courtiers took fewer risks. Even letters, once flowing with flirtation, became guarded, dry, carefully composed. You changed the temperature of the court, and centuries later you still change the way people think about power. You're the case study that won't stay pinned down. Were you reckless or trapped? Innocent or manipulative? A teenager in love or a noble pawn? The answer shifts depending on who's asking, and maybe that's the point. Maybe the power in your story lies in its refusal to be simple. Because history likes clean narratives, heroes, villains, victims. But you're not easy to box. You blur the lines. You force us to sit in discomfort. To admit that sometimes the people who are punished most severely are the ones who pose the least actual threat. You didn't start wars. You didn't rewrite laws. You didn't plot against the king. You just lived in a way that made others uncomfortable. You smiled too freely. You loved too visibly. You wanted too much. And for that, they broke you. But in breaking you, they revealed themselves. Because a system that can't accommodate softness, a system that requires perfection from its women and pardons every cruelty from its men, is already cracking. You were the fracture. Not the flaw, but the proof of it. And that is why your story still matters. Because when we talk about you now, it's not to gawk, it's to understand, to learn, to remember what happens when desire becomes dangerous, and when power pretends it's justice. You're not just part of Henry's long marital resume, you're the turning point. You're the reminder that queens, for all their titles and jewels, were never safe. And maybe, just maybe, your unfinished story is the one that teaches us the most. The more you're remembered, the less they can control your image. At first they tried to cage you in scandal. A beautiful fool who flew too close to the king's son. A cautionary tale to hang on classroom walls and history textbooks. Don't be like Catherine Howard. But the truth has outgrown the cage. You've slipped the shackles. Now people ask different questions. Not, how did she fall? But why was she ever expected to balance that high? You were always walking a tightrope high above a court full of knives, and you were never given a net. Because Tudor England didn't make space for girls like you. Girls who laughed at the wrong moment, who remembered old loves, who liked attention, who dared to flirt, to want to be more than obedient. You weren't groomed for queenship. You were groomed for silence, taught just enough to decorate a room, but not enough to steer it. The moment you became queen, the expectations became impossible. Pure but passionate, submissive but engaging, visible but not seen. And when you failed to thread that impossible needle, you weren't just discarded, you were destroyed. You weren't the only woman to fall prey to that kind of contradiction, but you were one of the youngest, and that, more than anything, is what hits people now. The age. You were around 17, maybe 19 at the most, when you were executed. Today, people look at girls that age and think of school uniforms, of awkward crushes, of TikToks and driver's licenses, not scaffolds, not charges of treason, not final words whispered to a block of wood. So, when your story is told now, it's not with judgment, it's with disbelief, with heartache, with that particular kind of ache that comes from knowing something never had to happen, that your death wasn't inevitable, only orchestrated, a combination of carelessness and cruelty that created a tragedy still echoing 500 years later. That's why your name keeps getting picked up again and again, why it refuses to stay in the margins. You represent every woman, every girl, who was told to smile until her jaw ached, who was blamed for being wanted, who wasn't given the language or the power to escape her own story. You became a queen because a king decided it. You died because he changed his mind. And that king, so large, so loud, so inescapable in his own era, has started to fade in the public imagination. Sure, his face is still everywhere, all red-bearded arrogance and portrait glory. But people talk about Henry now with more side-eyes than awe. They laugh at the idea of a man so volatile, so insecure, needing 6 wives just to keep rewriting his failures. And in that space, where the myth of Henry VIII crumbles, your voice grows louder. You, who he tried to erase. You, who only existed in court records as the late Queen. You, who never got a fair trial. Your voice comes back. Not through court documents or royal proclamations, but through art. Through song, through film. Through quiet moments where someone somewhere reads your letter and thinks, she sounds like me. That's how your story gets passed on. Not as monarchy, but as memory. It's why people still dress up as you. For plays, for reenactments, for Halloween parties where history lovers explain your fate between sips of cider. They paint your lips red and wear high-necked gowns, not to celebrate your death, but to reverse it. To reclaim the narrative, to say, look, she's still here. You appear in books written for young readers now too, carefully worded, gently handled, but still honest. They explain how the world punished you for being young and messy and real, how you were thrown into a role that no one helped you understand. These books don't present you as flawless, but they offer something no one did in your lifetime: context. And then there are the artists. Oh, how they love you. They paint your face into new centuries, giving you features they wish you'd had. Strong brows, clear eyes, lips that curve with knowing. They dress you in imagined colours, surround you with symbols, roses, locks, broken mirrors. They give you the kind of presence that Tudor portraiture denied you. Because the truth is, no one knows exactly what you looked like. There's no confirmed portrait of you. Every painting claimed to be you is debated, questioned, picked apart. That ambiguity has become a kind of freedom. Artists can make you into anything, and so they do. You are beautiful, fierce, devastated, amused, blood-stained, blooming. A dozen versions of you now live where before there were none. You're finally given faces, plural. A queen with infinite expressions. And still, they tell your story. In podcasts with glowing headphones late at night. In museum placards people read twice just to make sure they got it right. In songs where your name is sung over electric guitars and candlelight. In lectures where professors pause just a moment before describing how you died. Because your story isn't just about a beheading, it's about being seen. And that is what the Tudor world never gave you. They looked at you, yes, but never really saw you. But we do now. In the woman terrified to speak up because she knows how fast people turn on a girl who's too much. In the teenager fumbling through love and shame and expectation. In the survivor of institutions that punish mistakes more than they prevent harm. You're still here, not in body, not even in name on a tombstone, but in the ways people think, rethink, and slowly unlearn the lies they were told about girls like you. Because you weren't a scandal, you were a symptom, and now you're a signal. A signal that says, look closer, ask better questions, and listen to the ones who never got to tell their own story. So here we are, Catherine, at the end, or at least the end of this version of your story, and it's strange, isn't it, that after 500 years, your name still circles in the air like a whisper people can't quite let go of, not because you were a conqueror or a political genius or the architect of a dynasty, but because you were a girl who dared to be human in a system that demanded perfection. You loved, you erred, you hoped too loudly, and for that they made you disappear, or tried to. But now we know better. Now your story isn't buried in court records and dry textbooks. It's breathing. It's sung and staged and debated and felt. And in this modern world, where voices that were once silenced are finally starting to be heard, you have become more than a tragic headline in a long-dead king's resume. You've become a symbol of survival, not because you survived, but because your truth did. Your legacy is strange, multi-faced. Some remember you as the young queen undone by her own past. Others see you as a victim of elite games you never knew you were playing. Feminist writers see you as a casualty of patriarchal machinery, a girl ground down by expectation. Artists see you as a muse, unfinished and aching. Teenagers read about you and think, God, she was just like me. And yes, there are still those who dismiss you. Say you were reckless. Say you should have known better. But even their criticism keeps your name in motion. It's that motion that matters. Because stillness, for a woman like you, is what they always wanted. A queen to smile and sit and never question the rules of the room. That's what made you dangerous. You didn't stay still, not in life, not in death, and not now. Even your final words, whether whispered or imagined, have become your banner. I die a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Culpeper. No one knows if you actually said it. Some scholars call it legend invented years after. But legends exist for a reason. They don't need proof to be powerful. That line, whether born of your lips or another's pen, gave you something Henry's court never intended to offer. A voice. And what a voice. It breaks the silence of the tower. It echoes down the corridors of Hampton Court. It seeps into classrooms, novels, stage lights, podcasts, timelines. It reminds people, quietly, devastatingly, that you mattered. And because of you, so many others now feel they matter too. There's something sacred in that. Something unshakably human. A girl stripped of her dignity by law, by gossip, by crown, but not by time. Time has started to return to you what was stolen. Not justice, perhaps, but understanding, compassion, memory. Your story is no longer told through the eyes of men who wrote your fate into ink. It's told through the people who see themselves in you, who walk past your imagined portraits and pause, sensing something unfinished, something familiar. You are a queen, yes, but more than that, you are a reminder that power without care is cruelty, that image without truth is hollow, that forgetting someone does not mean they are gone, and so you linger, not in shadows but in spotlights, not in shame but in empathy, not in silence but in stories. This is the strange power of a teen queen executed for loving the wrong man. You become a mirror held up to every generation that follows, asking again and again, how do we treat girls like her now? Do we still blame them? Do we still silence them? Do we still demand perfection from the powerless? Or do we learn? Do we tell her story, not to shame, not to warn, but to listen, to feel, to remember? And if we do, then maybe your death becomes something more than a royal tragedy. Maybe it becomes a beginning, a seed planted in stone. Because every time someone whispers your name with love, every time someone tells your story without the old scorn, every time someone hears the click of heels in the haunted gallery and thinks, she's still here, you win, and they lose. Henry is dust. His throne has passed. His power is long gone. But you, Catherine, you're still being talked about, still being seen, still being mourned, still being understood, not as a queen, not as a scandal, but as a girl who never stopped trying to live. And that finally is your legacy. So now that we've walked beside her, through the silk-lined corridors and into the cold shadow of the scaffold, let's step back and breathe. Catherine Howard's story is heavy, and maybe a little too familiar. The teenage girl who made choices before she understood the cost, who was treated like she belonged to someone else, and then punished when she tried to belong to herself. But the point of telling stories like hers isn't to wallow in tragedy, it's to witness, to make sure the people who weren't allowed to speak still get heard, and that's what you've done tonight. You've made space for a voice that was nearly erased. You've sat in the discomfort, in the echoes, in the questions that still don't have answers. That's what history needs more of. Not just facts, but feeling. Not just names and dates, but care. Because it turns out, even after 5 centuries, we're still trying to figure out how to treat people with humanity. Catherine wasn't perfect. She was impulsive, sometimes careless, full of emotions she didn't yet know how to name. But that's not a crime. That's just being young. And maybe that's why we remember her. Not because of how she died, but because of how much life she had right before the world told her it was too much. So if you take anything with you into sleep tonight, let it be this. When someone like Catherine Howard is remembered, truly remembered, we chip away at the silence that was once forced on her, and in that small, quiet act, we honour something far bigger than one lost queen. We honour the right to be real.